Chapter 1, The Beginning. Lovesickness enters a dream. Old stories are like smoke, hard to find again, beautiful woman. Waking up from a lovesick dream, tears wet the handkerchief, my heart aches, waiting in vain. Meeting each other is so strange, old fate is hard to reconnect, sadness turns grey, love and hatred are like frost. Leave behind a sweet dream, in the next life, we pray that we will not forget. Sunset snow, deep, as if there are thousands of thoughts, only see the sky and earth white apiece, snowflakes flutter down, transparent sparkling, covering the whole land, a cold wind blew, snow as big as goose feathers fell down. On the quiet, rugged cliff, a natural cave blocked the pouring snow outside. On the cold, icy bed, a man closed his eyes tightly, lying silently on his back, his beautiful silver hair spread out. A woman wearing a light orange long robe, a pink short brocade jacket, the hem of the coat was sewn with pure white rabbit fur, an orange silk ribbon tied around her waist, her long hair like brocade was neatly tied up with a red coral and jade hairpin, her graceful figure, like a fairy lost in the mortal realm contaminated with a bit of worldly dust, causing the man to suddenly lose his soul. Owen Carter, how long will you sleep before you wake up to see me? The eyes that sparkled like the stars looked at the motionless man, a trace of pain appeared in the clear eyes, caressing the silver hair that stung her eyes, a tear, slowly rolled down her cheek. She waited for him for a year, he actually had the heart to abandon her, seeing her suffer like this. Not far away, a man stood tall, his black hair was tied up in a pale purple jade bun, a few strands of hair fell down his forehead, his skin was fair, his long, elegant eyebrows slanted towards his temples, his phoenix eyes were long and narrow, his lively gaze carried a bit of evil spirit, his nose was straight and perfect, his thin, diamond-shaped lips were rosy, his resolute chin made his feminine face a bit more masculine. His tall figure was wearing a long black cloak, not reducing his domineering and noble appearance at all. The woman's actions made his heart ache, but he could only silently endure it. I want to marry Owen Carter. Turning around, the woman smiled charmingly. That smile made the man's eyes sting. Pain. Compared to what you caused me and Owen Carter, what is this pain? Stepping in front of the man, her soft little hand slowly placed on the man's cold face, following his cheekbones slowly down, to his left chest, smiling charmingly. She knew, this was the best way to get revenge on him. The best way to get revenge on someone is to stab them in the heart. His deep eyes were filled with anguish, his hands hanging limply at his sides trembled slightly, the man's face remained expressionless, yet his heart was shattered, broken into fragments. He wanted to inquire what precisely he needed to do for her to forgive him. The woman before him was incredibly close, yet seemingly distant. You will need to arrange it yourself, keep in mind that this is your obligation to us. Turn around, depart with determination, leaving behind only an enchanting silhouette. The wind was frigid, yet he remained discontent with the chill. Until that exquisite figure vanished from view, the cold visage betrayed a semblance of anguish. Gradually shifting her gaze to the man on the ice bed, she asserted that this was what he owed them, and it was undeniably accurate. The corner of his mouth was tinged with bitterness. Who could comprehend the anguish within his heart? If witnessing her in a wedding dress and personally escorting her to another man's side could alleviate my feelings of guilt, then so be it. In this life, it seems that you and I may not have any further opportunities. In the next life, could you grant me another chance? I do not wish to request anything overly ambitious, I simply pray to God for the opportunity to meet her again in the next life, to embrace her with love and protection, and to whisper in her ear, I love you. The murmurs of affection, accompanied by that solitary silhouette, linger in this desolate ravine, destined to endure. Early spring snow flutters incessantly. Situated in a vibrant locale, the manor of the Grand Chancellor's residence exudes a serene tranquility. A petite woman rested against the open window, seemingly unfazed by the cold wind brushing against her face. Her long, silky hair billowed in the breeze. Her delicate hands extended out the window, where cold snowflakes gently descended onto her pale palms, swirling playfully. Snow White lamented that spring had arrived too late, prompting her to soar through the branches of the garden path, causing flowers to take flight. As she gazed at the snowflakes dissolving in her hand, she lifted her eyes to the sky. The woman softly parted her crimson lips and murmured to herself. The edges of her mouth curved into a lovely smile. The woman donned a light-hued, floor-length gown, her slender waist accentuated by a rattan belt, further emphasizing her petite silhouette. Her hair was embellished with a 7-treasure coral hairpin, enhancing her visage to resemble a hibiscus flower. Her beauty was unparalleled, her phoenix eyes exuded a natural charm and brilliance, yet retained a regal quality. Her black hair cascaded freely in the breeze. Her exquisite, unembellished face radiated an aura of elegance and otherworldliness. Mississippi. The youthful voice drew the woman's attention back. Before she could respond, a small figure swiftly stepped in front of her, delicately draping a cloak over the woman's slender shoulders. In her gaze, there was a trace of reproach. It was so cold, why did she not know how to stay warm? Lily Hart, it is acceptable. Even though her body was cold, the woman remained indifferent. She delicately removed the cloak from her shoulders, offered a soft smile to the maid beside her, turned, and gazed out the window with a vacant expression. A wave of sorrow welled up in her heart. Her name was Evelyn Carter, the daughter of the current Prime Minister of the Ming Dynasty, yet she held an unfortunate position as a concubine, an uncherished young woman. In her previous life, she had been merely an orphan, but unexpectedly, upon her rebirth, her status remained unchanged. In light of this circumstance, Evelyn felt a sense of contentment. After all, a person who had already faced death was given a second chance, despite having arrived in this unfamiliar dynasty. The wind is powerful. The maid, Lily Hart, observed Evelyn's actions, pursed her lips in discontent, then delicately donned her cloak, unable to suppress a sigh within her heart. With considerable effort, the young lady's condition is gradually improving, however, what if it deteriorates? As if attuned to Lily Hart's anxiety, Evelyn ceased her resistance, tightened her cloak, turned, and offered a faint smile. In this dynasty, it seems that only Lily Hart genuinely concerns herself with my well-being, her icy heart enveloped by a warm current. The Ming Dynasty, a period that had not been documented in world history, presented an unfamiliar yet unfrightening challenge for Evelyn. Prior to her transmigration, she was an internationally renowned assassin known as Vanessa Carter. However, during a mission, she was tragically killed by the very man she loved most. One morning, she found herself transmigrated into the role of the daughter of the Prime Minister of this dynasty. He. Laughing softly, Evelyn covered her slightly aching left chest, and the corners of her eyes involuntarily became moist. She could accept the reality of her transmigration with composure, yet each time she recalled the man who had broken her heart, she found it impossible to suppress the anguish within her. Chapter 2 Temporal Exploration. She, who was initially devoid of emotion and affection, found herself heartbroken and in tears due to the so-called love. In retrospect, it was indeed absurd. Miss, is something troubling you? Are you feeling unwell? Observing Evelyn Carter clutching her chest and quietly weeping, Lily Hart quickly approached and inquired with concern. 3 days ago, Evelyn Carter unexpectedly fell into the water, leaving everyone puzzled about the cause. As Evelyn's maid, Lily Hart remained by her bedside for 3 days and nights, ultimately waiting for Evelyn to regain consciousness. Throughout this period, Lily sensed that something was amiss with Evelyn. Observing her frail condition, she hesitated to voice her concerns. "It's all right, Lily Hart, I am fatigued." Raising her hand, she delicately brushed away the cold tears from her cheeks, silently laughing at herself. Tears, such a trivial thing, were never necessary for her. This was the only occasion she shed tears, and it would also be the last. Upon hearing Evelyn's words, Lily Hart approached to assist her frail form onto the soft bed, gently draping a thin blanket over her. Observing Evelyn's pallid complexion, Lily felt a profound sorrow for the young lady residing in the Prime Minister's mansion, who appeared despondent each day. With a soft sigh, she turned and departed. Her eyes were half closed. After Lily Hart departed, she gradually opened them, the corner of her mouth curling into a sardonic smile. This body truly could not endure, it was remarkably frail. With a sigh, Evelyn slowly closed her eyes once more. Outside, a cacophony erupted, and the eyes that had just closed flew open. Before Evelyn could respond, a shrill female voice pierced the air beside her, prompting her delicate eyebrows to furrow slightly. "Evelyn Carter, instruct me." With an arrogant demeanor and brusque gestures, the individual who approached forcefully seized Evelyn's arm with both hands. Looking up, he observed a red figure materialize before him. The individual appeared to be around 15 or 16 years old, with a striking oval face that radiated contempt and dissatisfaction towards Evelyn. "Release." Evelyn spoke coldly, her eyes slowly descending to the small hands that gripped her arms tightly. Evelyn did not recognize the woman before her and felt a surge of disgust at her impolite behavior. Before the woman could respond, Evelyn summoned all her strength to shove her aside, liberating herself from the constraints binding her hands. Staggering, the woman stepped back, casting an angry glare at Evelyn, who was gradually rising to her feet, her petite face suffused with disdain. "Evelyn Carter, do you truly believe you can treat me in this manner?" The piercing voice immediately permeated the room. The woman's tone was laden with anger and, even more so, indignation. "Excuse me, miss." Lily Hart's eyes were crimson, her left hand shielding her cheek, as she walked sullenly to Evelyn Carter's side. Observing the maidservant's red and swollen cheeks, Evelyn's icy eyes narrowed, her piercing gaze directed at the girl who stood before her, exuding smug self-satisfaction. From Lily Hart's remarks, Evelyn finally discerned the identity of the woman in front of her. The visitor was Amelia Carter, the younger sister of Evelyn Carter and the most cherished youngest daughter of Prime Minister William Carter, who resided in the mansion with an air of arrogance, dominance, and obstinacy. "Please leave." With a disdainful snort, Evelyn brusquely dismissed the individual before her. She had gleaned a considerable amount of information regarding the affairs of the Prime Minister's mansion from Lily Hart. The presence of Amelia Carter filled Evelyn with profound distaste. Eyes widened in disbelief, Amelia Carter glared at Evelyn with anger. "You instruct me to leave? Evelyn Carter, you contemptible individual, what authority do you possess to raise your voice at me?" Amelia Carter exclaimed within the confines of the Prime Minister's residence. Even her father would not dare to address her in such a manner. This Evelyn Carter was indeed audacious, boldly instructing her to leave. Very well, if she did not impart a lesson to this insolent individual, who seemed oblivious to the consequences of her actions, she would no longer be worthy of the name Amelia Carter. "Madam, our madam," Lily Hart was clearly unsettled by Evelyn's words. It is important to note that the former young lady of the mansion, known for her submissiveness and lack of resistance, now that she had spoken, caused Lily Hart's heart to race. Everyone was aware of the young lady's notorious methods of tormenting others. Anxiously, Lily Hart spoke, instinctively positioning herself in front of Evelyn to shield her. "I, the young lady, am speaking, why are you, a mere servant, interrupting?" Before Lily Hart could complete her statement, Amelia Carter hurried to her side, raised her hand to strike her multiple times, and violently tugged at her hair, that wretched servant. "Enough." Evelyn seized Amelia Carter's hands with one hand and spoke with anger. "This woman is becoming unhinged, keep your distance from me and best remove yourself from my presence." "You," Amelia Carter's curses were on the verge of escaping her lips when her gaze met Evelyn's icy stare. A wave of fear surged within her, and the words that had formed in her mouth were instantly stifled. "You are not welcome here, leave my presence at once." With a decisive wave of her hand, Evelyn's slender fingers gestured toward the door, her phoenix-like eyes narrowing slightly, exuding a chilling aura from her presence. Amelia Carter had never witnessed Evelyn exhibiting such coldness. she was so frightened that her entire body trembled incessantly, and that piercing gaze instilled a sense of panic within her. "Amelia Carter, leave my presence at once." Cold eyes, akin to a sharp knife, relentlessly tormented Amelia Carter. Evelyn spoke again with icy detachment. She merely desired to live peacefully within this dynasty. As for the previous life of this body, she had no interest in knowing. The current soul inhabiting this body was Vanessa Carter, and she would not permit anyone before her to act with such impunity. Amelia Carter's initial hostility was swiftly quelled by Evelyn's icy stare. She became silent, apprehensive about uttering another word. Lily Hart glanced to the side, her gaze meeting Evelyn's icy stare. Overwhelmed, she averted her eyes. In Lily's perception, Evelyn Carter had always been gentle and charming, never possessing such piercing eyes. Amelia Carter glared furiously at the woman before her, her heart brimming with resentment. She could only stomp her feet in frustration beneath Evelyn Carter's icy stare before turning to leave, filled with reluctance. Lily Hart observed this and nearly applauded in delight. After all, she had never encountered such a young woman before. Noticing the young woman's pale complexion, she felt an undeniable sense of joy. "Wait." As Amelia Carter turned, Evelyn icily summoned her, fixating on her retreating figure, a malevolent glimmer flickering in her eyes. "Evelyn Carter, you scoundrel, Evelyn Carter, I caution you, Alexander Blake is destined to be mine. Regardless of the schemes you employ to persuade the Emperor to endorse the marriage, your desires will remain unfulfilled. Die, you wretched creature." Chaotic images rapidly flooded Evelyn's mind, and a painful expression emerged on her delicate face. A sensation of suffocation enveloped her as Amelia Carter's distorted visage and harsh words reverberated incessantly in her ears. Her once pale complexion drained of color, leaving her devoid of blood due to the anguish. Evelyn's icy gaze followed Amelia Carter as she retreated, each step pushing her closer to the door. Chapter 3, henceforth, she shall be known as Evelyn Carter. Amelia Carter, after treating me in such a manner, do you believe you can return unscathed? Speaking icily, Evelyn, her expression somber, approached Amelia Carter. At that moment, her entire demeanor radiated an aura of chill. Regarding the reason he fell into the water, undoubtedly, the woman before him was more aware than anyone else. Hearing Evelyn's shout, Amelia Carter turned around in anger, her hands on her hips as she glared at Evelyn before her. Could it be that this woman, after falling into the water, had suffered some mental impairment that led her to speak to him in such a tone? "Carter." Amelia Carter felt a surge of anger and wanted to speak, but under Evelyn's icy stare, she fell silent. The intensity of Evelyn's gaze was chilling. Her delicate frame trembled involuntarily. Amelia Carter gazed at Evelyn, who was advancing toward her with an air of intimidation. She took a step back, retreating into the yard while cautiously observing Evelyn's frigid demeanor. Seeing the expression of fear on Amelia Carter's face, Evelyn felt a surge of derision within her. "What transpired? What actions did you take previously? You were so haughty. Now, you are fearful." With a sardonic glance directed at Amelia Carter, Evelyn slowly advanced. "Evelyn Carter, that is sufficient. What is your intention?" Step by step, Amelia Carter's voice quivered as she spoke, lacking confidence. Under Evelyn's piercing gaze, an inexplicable fear enveloped her, an emotion she had never experienced before. The gentle and fragile woman she once knew now appeared transformed, exuding a chilling presence that instilled dread in Amelia Carter. In response to Amelia Carter's fear, Evelyn merely sneered, her gaze icy as she fixed her eyes on the woman before her. As her attention shifted to Amelia Carter, Evelyn offered a charming smile. "What would you like to do?" Speaking icily, Evelyn swiftly stepped in front of Amelia Carter, disengaged her hands with a single motion, and let out a chilling laugh. "Strike the dog with its hindquarters." "Amelia Carter, how did you treat Evelyn Carter?" "Rest assured, I will ensure you experience it gradually." Vanessa Carter has never been a benevolent individual, having transmigrated to this dynasty and residing in Evelyn Carter's place, she will not permit herself to endure any injustices. Amelia Carter remained perplexed by the significance of Evelyn's words when, without warning, Evelyn shoved her small frame, causing her to plunge into the frigid lake. Ah, assistance! Amelia Carter was in a state of panic, calling for assistance as her petite frame thrashed in the water. Her lovely face was etched with fear, she was unable to swim. In that moment, she could only wave her arms frantically and shout for help, compelled to act in such a manner regardless of the circumstances. Evelyn regarded the woman floundering and pleading for assistance in the water with a mocking gaze. She leaned down and forcefully pressed her slender hands onto Amelia Carter's shoulders, a malevolent glimmer flickering in her eyes. Carter. Evelyn Carter, release me, rescue me. Under Evelyn's influence, Amelia Carter's consciousness was swiftly engulfed by the torrent of water, leaving behind an emptiness. She floundered in the depths, her hands desperately thrashing against the water, splattering it in all directions, as her body sank further, evoking the chilling breath of mortality. Suffocating, perpetually suffocating. Miss Lily Hart heard Amelia Carter's cry for assistance and hurried out of the room. She could hardly believe her eyes. Amelia Carter was writhing in pain, while Evelyn Carter clutched her tightly. Miss, please release her, second miss. Lily Hart exclaimed in alarm and hurried to Evelyn's side. Her petite hands desperately attempted to halt her movements, but her strength was insufficient against Evelyn's. She could only observe helplessly as Amelia Carter's body gradually descended into the water, her small face ashen. From beginning to end, Evelyn's expression remained devoid of emotion. Her clear eyes were icy as she observed Amelia Carter's body cease its struggle and gradually descend. Only then did she release her grip and coldly regard the scene before her. Lily Hart was terrified, her body collapsed to the ground, trembling uncontrollably. This young woman was not the person she once knew, instilling a profound sense of fear within her. Evelyn Carter, suddenly, an enraged roar erupted from behind. An irate older man surged in front of Evelyn. Observing Amelia Carter slowly submerging in the water, he pivoted and bellowed at the servants trailing him, commanding them to swiftly descend and rescue her. Evelyn gazed up at the elderly man before her, his white hair contrasting sharply with his furious expression, yet she remained silent, exhibiting not a trace of fear. The loud noise had already alerted everyone in the mansion. The servants swiftly entered the water, rescued the struggling Amelia Carter, and urgently administered first aid. William Carter approached Evelyn with a pallid complexion, raised his hand, and struck her forcefully. He had just returned from court and learned that his daughter had been shoved into the water by this woman. Enraged, he hurried over. Evelyn Carter, are you weary of existing? William Carter adored his daughter. Upon seeing Amelia Carter's pale face, who had fainted, he erupted in anger. Rebel, this audacious girl, daring to confront Lily, appears to be inviting a confrontation. Evelyn was taken aback by William Carter's sudden assault, forcing her to withstand his furious slap. 5 vivid red handprints instantly marked her lovely face, and her cheeks throbbed with a searing pain. Evelyn's eyes gleamed with a frigid intensity as she averted her face from the strike, casting a fierce glare at the irate man before her. Before anyone could respond, Evelyn lifted her slender hands and struck William Carter forcefully across the face, her phoenix eyes reflecting profound gloom. A resounding slap reverberated through the air, causing everyone's eyes to widen and their mouths to fall open in disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. Lily Hart emitted a cry, unable to comprehend the situation, her face drained of color as she observed the chaos around her. Oh my goodness, the young woman is audacious, daring to strike the elderly man. Lily Hart was unable to quell her concern for Evelyn. Everyone in the mansion was aware that the young lady was the one the old master favored the least. Now, the young lady had struck the old master. What course of action should she take? Evelyn Carter, William Carter was equally unprepared for Evelyn's audacity in slapping him. His expression contorted instantly, and the fury within him ignited as he shouted at Evelyn and advanced toward her. Evelyn regarded the man who abruptly positioned himself in front of her with a frigid gaze, the corner of her mouth twisting into a derisive smile. In her mind, everything about Evelyn Carter emerged in an instant, her life, her habits, all flooded her consciousness. The man before her was Evelyn Carter's father. Evelyn was acutely aware that she had never been respected in the Carter mansion, merely because she was the daughter of a concubine. William Carter had never looked at her directly since her birth, viewing Evelyn as a disgrace he preferred not to acknowledge. That is the reason behind Evelyn's actions. She is no longer the Evelyn Carter of yesteryear. From this point forward, she is Vanessa Carter. Vanessa Carter supplants Evelyn Carter and thrives. She will make it clear to everyone that she is not someone to be easily intimidated. Furthermore, she will not emulate Evelyn by enduring their humiliation without cause. William Carter, take your daughter and leave my presence. With icy eyes fixed on William Carter's contorted visage, Evelyn spoke with a chilling detachment. She could no longer concern herself with Evelyn Carter's past. From this moment forward, she would not relent, regardless of their intentions. William Carter's eyes were bloodshot as he glared at Evelyn with a frigid expression, his heart ablaze with anger. What did you mean? William Carter erupted in fury, so incensed that he leaped to his feet, yearning to advance and impart a lesson to the presumptuous woman before him. Had she sprouted wings? She believed she had discovered an ally, audaciously daring to be so insolent in his presence. Contemplating this, William Carter's expression soured. He grasped the stick on the ground, intending to swing it toward Evelyn before him. He was filled with rage. This wretched individual, if she were not also his daughter, he would have long since inflicted severe harm upon her. Now, however, it was intolerable. She had the audacity to be so disloyal. Enough. Raising her hand, Evelyn deftly seized the stick that William Carter was swinging in her direction. A resolute expression emerged in her eyes, accompanied by a surge of lethal intent. While this body may have been frail, it did not imply that the skills acquired by Vanessa Carter in the 21st century could not be manifested. You! William Carter roared in anger, his face flushed a deep shade of liver. His hand swung the stick high above his head in response to Evelyn's movements. Despite his considerable strength, he could not compel Evelyn to release her grip. Evelyn cast a cold glance at William Carter, revealing a hint of impatience on her face. William Carter, I am no longer the Evelyn Carter of the past. You would be wise not to provoke me, otherwise, you will undoubtedly come to regret it. With considerable force, Evelyn seized the stick from William Carter's hand and hurled it violently to the ground. A hint of lethal intent emerged on her striking visage. If William Carter provokes her once more, she will undoubtedly ensure he meets a gruesome end. She is resolute in her intentions. Under Evelyn's frigid gaze, William Carter experienced a resurgence of fear. It was at that moment he recognized that the woman before him was no longer the person he once knew. Her somber eyes instilled a sense of dread within him once more. You are insufferable. William Carter flicked his sleeves and shot a glare, but under Evelyn's unwavering gaze, he fell silent, glared intensely at her, and stormed off in anger. Observing William Carter's furious departure, Evelyn merely offered a cold smile before turning away to proceed deeper into the interior. If this was fate's design, she would assume the identity of Evelyn Carter and thrive within this dynasty. From this point forward, she, Vanessa Carter, shall be known as Evelyn Carter. Evelyn Carter will resolutely refuse to allow others to intimidate her. Chapter 4, The Third Prince, Miss. Anne Hathaway cautiously opened the door, carrying a large tray in her hand, and timidly stepped in front of Evelyn. Evelyn truly astonished Anne Hathaway today. Had she been the young woman she once was, she would never have dared to confront the second young lady, much less strike the master. Ever since Evelyn regained consciousness after her fall into the water, Anne Hathaway has sensed a profound change in her. As she slowly turned around and observed the tray in Anne Hathaway's hand, the striking red hue caused Evelyn's eyebrows to furrow. Her gaze shifted to Anne Hathaway, anticipating her words. If she was not mistaken, this should be a dress. Such a stunning and captivating hue was the color Evelyn despised the most. Bowing her head, Anne Hathaway refrained from meeting Evelyn's gaze directly. She could only clench her teeth and withstand Evelyn's icy stare. A sense of fear inevitably surged within her. Anne Hathaway had been by Evelyn's side since childhood and had never before faced such a look from her, leaving her profoundly unsettled. What? Observing that Anne Hathaway was disinclined to speak, Evelyn approached the elongated table, her petite frame casually leaning against it. Anne Hathaway's fear was evident in Evelyn's eyes, the corner of her mouth subtly curving into a graceful arc. Her actions throughout the day must have frightened the girl. Evelyn gazed out the dark window, her heart heavy with helplessness. Evelyn Carter's previous existence was marked by indifference. Now, inhabiting the body of Vanessa Carter, an assassin, she is resolute in her determination not to succumb to weakness or allow others to intimidate her. In this regard, Evelyn hopes that Anne Hathaway will gradually come to understand. Anne Hathaway listened to Evelyn speak, then lifted her head and presented the tray she held before Evelyn. "Madam, this is the wedding attire dispatched from the palace. Kindly review it and determine if any adjustments are necessary. We will ensure it is amended." The day after tomorrow marks Evelyn's wedding day. The Emperor commissioned someone to hastily create this wedding attire, which was not finished until this evening. He promptly arranged for it to be delivered to the Prime Minister's residence. Evelyn raised her eyebrows as her gaze gradually shifted to the dress before her. Her delicate features betrayed no emotion, yet her heart was overwhelmed with shock. Wedding attire. What did Anne Hathaway mean? "Anne Hathaway, what do you imply?" Evelyn spoke with a chill in her voice. She had only been in this dynasty for a few days, and her memories as Evelyn Carter were also fragmented. Could it be that, after her transition, she was on the verge of marriage? Such a gruesome narrative left Evelyn feeling profoundly unsettled. Anne Hathaway lifted her gaze, regarding Evelyn with perplexity, her eyes brimming with scrutiny. "Why is the young lady behaving so oddly? Have you forgotten? The day after tomorrow marks the young lady's wedding to the third prince. Such a significant event, do you truly not recall? Miss, the day after tomorrow marks your significant occasion with the third prince, have you forgotten?" Anne Hathaway gazed at Evelyn with concern. From her bewildered expression, she finally comprehended that her young lady truly did not recall the matter. Anne Hathaway's heart was heavy with anxiety. What could be done? The day after tomorrow marked the young lady's wedding day, yet she was unable to remember anything. Anne Hathaway's words caused a dramatic shift in Evelyn's expression. She leaped to her feet, her eyes brimming with disbelief. It was just as she suspected, the third prince was getting married, a development that left Evelyn feeling unsettled, as she was still unfamiliar with this dynasty. Upon hearing the news, her heart immediately stirred. "I will not marry." Indifferently, Evelyn Carter glanced at the garments in Lily Hart's hand and retorted angrily, "Marry a stranger? Absurd. I would rather die than enter into such a union." Lily Hart's face reflected panic. She had not anticipated Evelyn's blunt refusal. Awkwardly, she gazed at Evelyn, her petite features contorting like a bitter melon. She remarked, "The wedding is the day after tomorrow. If Miss refuses to marry now, isn't that complicating matters for her? Furthermore, this marriage. Promptly dispose of these items." Confronted by the vivid red hue before her, Evelyn experienced a profound sense of discomfort. She gestured dismissively and curtly instructed Lily Hart. Lily Hart bowed her head, examining the items in her hand. When she lifted her gaze to meet Evelyn's, an uncomfortable expression emerged on her petite face. "Miss, you cannot dispose of it. This was custom made by the Emperor himself." Moreover, this marriage was personally consented to by you. Have you forgotten, miss? Lily Hart was engulfed in uncertainty, her gaze intently fixed on Evelyn, seeking to discern something from her expression. Ever since the young woman awoke, she had exhibited peculiar behavior. Not only had her demeanor shifted significantly, but she had also lost all recollection of her past. Contemplating this, Lily Hart felt a surge of resentment rise within her. How could she so easily forget something so vital? Hearing Lily Hart speak, Evelyn frowned. Did she truly agree to it herself? Why couldn't she recall anything? Miss. Lily Hart appeared despondent as she resentfully called Evelyn. Caught in a dilemma, she recognized that her young lady truly did not recall the matter. However, the emperor had personally sanctioned the marriage, and the young lady had also given her consent. If she were to change her mind now, it would constitute an act of treason, an offense that the young lady could not endure. Lily Hart, I have lost a portion of my memory. I cannot recall this. Please go out first and allow me some time to reflect in silence. Evelyn gazed into Lily Hart's uncertain eyes and offered a gentle explanation. At that moment, she could only rely on this rationale to shield Lily Hart from the truth. She could not reveal that her young lady had passed away and that she was merely a spirit from the 21st century, inhabiting her young lady's body. Even if she were to disclose this, the young girl might not accept it. Upon hearing Evelyn's explanation, Lily Hart's curiosity subsided, and she exhaled in relief. She had been concerned that something was amiss with the young woman. It appeared that her fall into the water had resulted in a partial loss of memory. Now, Lily could feel reassured. This clarified the reasons behind the young woman's peculiar behavior in recent days. Excuse me, I will be leaving first. Lily Hart set the tray in her hand on the table, cast an uneasy glance at Evelyn, and then, under her scrutiny, gradually approached the door. As Lily Hart's figure faded from view, Evelyn's gaze instinctively shifted to the red wedding attire. Her heart bore no inclination towards marriage, and her delicate features unmistakably reflected her discomfort. Damned! Silently cursing in her heart, Evelyn rubbed her forehead, plagued by a headache, as she found herself in a dilemma. At the residence of the third prince, a man stood with his arms crossed before the window, the candlelight illuminating his back. His jet-black hair was neatly tied with pale purple jade, and his fair skin complemented his elegant eyebrows. His long, narrow phoenix eyes, straight and perfect nose, and thin, diamond-shaped lips, which were tinged with a rosy hue, contributed to his striking appearance. The resolute chin accentuated the masculinity of his otherwise delicate features. Dressed in a black robe, his tall figure radiated an aura of dominance and nobility. Esteemed elder brother. Standing behind the man was another individual, adorned in a white robe, with thick eyebrows, phoenix-like eyes, a prominent nose, and thin lips. His gaze was clear and untainted, exuding a gentle demeanor that seemed capable of embracing all, reminiscent of a pristine lake shimmering under the spring sunlight, inviting others to immerse themselves within. Daniel Reed furrowed his brow and called out to the man in black, who had his back turned to him, his voice laced with concern. The man in black, with his hands clasped behind his back, was the current third prince, Alexander Blake. His entire presence exuded a chilling aura, causing the surrounding air to feel as though it had frozen. Slowly turning around, Alexander Blake's expression was somber, his gaze fixed on the vibrant red wedding fireworks on the table. The brilliant hue appeared to penetrate his vision, and within the depths of his eyes flickered a glimmer of disdain and ruthlessness. Daniel, do you have any updates? Alexander Blake swiftly averted his gaze, his frigid stare landing on Daniel Reed. His voice was devoid of warmth, and his expression remained inscrutable, rendering it difficult to discern his emotional state. One could only faintly sense the chilling aura emanating from him. He was seething, striving to contain his fury. Daniel Reed shook his head in resignation, his gaze trailing Alexander Blake to the table as he let out a soft sigh. Observing this, Alexander Blake's demeanor grew increasingly frigid, reminiscent of someone recently emerged from an icy pool. His piercing gaze ignited with a fierce intensity. His fists, clenched tightly behind his back, revealed bulging veins, a testament to the anger surging within him. A living individual cannot vanish without leaving a trace. Locate him for me. I refuse to accept that I, Alexander Blake, the third prince of the Ming dynasty, am unable to find the one I love. Alexander Blake gritted his teeth, his striking features set in a cold expression. He could hardly believe it, despite exerting all his strength, he still could not locate her. His gaze involuntarily shifted toward the wedding attire, his face betraying his anger. Hastily approaching the table, he swung his hand, sending the clothes tumbling to the floor, his eyes bloodshot and his heart brimming with indignation. Curse it, the royal marriage decree, curse it, Evelyn Carter. Elder brother, please remain calm, the day after tomorrow is your wedding, and it is unwise to provoke the emperor. Daniel Reed crouched to gather the garments strewn across the floor, unable to suppress a reminder to Alexander Blake regarding their predicament. The emperor had sanctioned the marriage, and as subjects, they possessed no authority to decline. Defying the edict constituted a capital offense. Furthermore, in just 2 days, the emperor would personally officiate the wedding. Daniel Reed harbored genuine concerns that Alexander Blake might act impulsively. Daniel Reed's words were akin to pouring oil on a fire. Alexander Blake's veins bulged on his forehead as his cold eyes fixed intently on Daniel. Each of Daniel's remarks felt like a dagger to Alexander's heart. If it were not for the emperor's blessing, the one he cherished would not have vanished. Being compelled to marry someone he did not love had already ignited Alexander's fury, and now, with the absence of his beloved, the anger within him blazed even more intensely. The emperor's decree must not be contravened. This further drove Alexander Blake to madness and left Daniel Reed in a state of helplessness. Elder brother, noticing Alexander Blake's silence, Daniel Reed called out anxiously. The cold aura surrounding him unmistakably betrayed the hatred within his heart. Daniel Reed was genuinely concerned that, in the next moment, he might lose control and rush to the Prime Minister's residence to harm the girl who was on the verge of marrying him. Gradually dissipating the lethal aura surrounding him, Alexander Blake swiftly regained his composure. I am aware of my limitations. Snorting disdainfully, Alexander Blake cast a contemptuous glance at the vivid red hue before turning and exiting the door. So what if he married? He, Alexander Blake, pledged to ensure Evelyn Carter regretted her decision to marry into Prince's mansion, to make her rue the day she angered him. Observing Alexander Blake's diminishing silhouette, Daniel Reed felt a deep sigh escape him, his heart heavy with concern. I sincerely hope that the wedding day, occurring the day after tomorrow, proceeds without any issues. Chapter 5, The Grand Wedding, Drought encounters rain, in a distant land reunites with an old friend, on the wedding night blossoms flourish, the name emerges on the golden list. Evelyn Carter found the so-called 4 great joys of life to be utterly absurd in her heart. Gently parting her crimson lips, her clear autumnal eyes gazed at the frigid girl reflected in the bronze mirror, as the corners of Evelyn's mouth curled into a sardonic smile. A vibrant red brocade robe cascades to the ground, with the pleats of the skirt gently flowing and trailing an additional 3 meters. The hem and sleeves are adorned with gold glitter, while the surface of the skirt features an intricately embroidered phoenix in flight, accented by bright red peonies. The waist is slender, measuring less than a fist, cinched with a matching belt tied into an elegant bow that accentuates the graceful silhouette. The belt showcases a dense array of intricate patterns, and the jet-black hair is styled in a lily fashion, secured with dragon and phoenix hairpins arranged in horizontal rows, complemented by a charming peony at the back. The exquisite jade visage was intricately sculpted with flawless features, the clear eyes conveyed a subtle chill, while the refined countenance exuded a hint of allure, enchanting all who beheld it. Gazing at her reflection in the mirror, Evelyn smiled icily, her eyes fixating on the phoenix crown adorned with pearls beside her, remarkably radiant. Miss Lily Hart quietly opened the door, approached Evelyn, who was seated at the dressing table, and called softly. The bridal party had been waiting outside for an extended period, now only anticipating Evelyn's arrival to proceed to Prince's mansion. The auspicious hour was drawing near, yet her young lady remained unresponsive. Reluctantly, Lily Hart felt compelled to go and prompt them. Looking up, Evelyn gradually rose to her feet, gesturing for Lily Hart to place the phoenix crown upon her, her exquisite visage betraying no emotion. After 2 days of contemplation, Evelyn ultimately reached a decision. The reality of her transmigration to this dynasty was indisputable. Since she had arrived, she would establish herself and enter into marriage. As long as she could live in tranquility within this dynasty, that would suffice. The crimson veil obscured Evelyn's sight, while the phoenix crown, adorned with exquisite brocade and supported by Lily Hart, accentuated her graceful form. As she entered the wedding palanquin, she sat upright, her expression hidden beneath the red veil, revealing a face devoid of any joy. Along the way, the music was vibrant, and the lively market grew even more animated due to the wedding procession. Finally, the flower palanquin came to a halt before the gate of the third prince's mansion, remaining still. An elderly man gradually approached the palanquin, leaned in to whisper something in Lily Hart's ear, prompting her to glare in anger. "My young lady is a princess who was appropriately wed to the prince, you all are excessive." Lily Hart's delicate features, in response to the old man's remarks, swiftly transformed into a frown, her voice tinged with apprehension. Her young lady was personally wed by the emperor. The inhabitants of this prince's mansion were excessive in their treatment of her young lady. Regardless of the circumstances, Lily Hart could not come to terms with it. The elderly gentleman served as the butler of the prince's mansion. Upon observing Lily Hart's furious demeanor, a look of concern crossed his face. This was the prince's directive, and as his subordinates, they had no alternative but to comply. Exaggerated. Before the elderly man could utter a word, Lily Hart furiously opened her mouth and glared at him. Although her young lady was not received warmly in the Prime Minister's mansion, the residents of the prince's mansion should not overstep their bounds. A properly married princess was employing etiquette to greet a concubine. If this incident were to become public knowledge, would it not render her young lady a subject of ridicule? Evelyn sat silently in the palanquin, listening intently to Lily Hart's discontented remarks. The corner of her mouth twisted into a frosty smile. It appeared that the situation was more complex than anticipated. It seemed she had found herself in a challenging predicament. "Lily Hart, what troubles you?" Slender hands delicately raised the curtain of the palanquin as Evelyn inquired in a frosty tone. Upon hearing Evelyn's question, Lily Hart cast an unwilling glare at the elderly man before swiftly approaching the palanquin, visibly troubled and uncertain about how to initiate the conversation. Witnessing such an affront to others, Lily Hart felt a surge of anger and was at a loss for how to articulate it. "Miss, this prince's mansion is overwhelming, they truly, Lily Hart was rendered speechless by the remaining words. The mere thought of it ignited a surge of anger within her. Her eyes brimmed with fury, and her heart was heavy with reluctance. After waiting for an extended period without receiving a response, Evelyn's face betrayed her impatience. However, concealed beneath the red veil, her emotions remained hidden from view, though the cold aura emanating from her was palpable. "Our prince has stated that if Miss Carter wishes to enter, she should do so through the back door." The elderly man approached Evelyn and recited his master's words verbatim to the woman before him. Recently, the prince had directed them that if the princess wished to enter, she would need to use the back door. The main entrance would be reserved exclusively for one individual, and that individual would be Miss Quinn. Upon hearing this, Evelyn not only refrained from expressing anger but also smiled, the corners of her mouth curving upward. Before anyone could respond, she dismounted the palanquin herself, standing tall with pride. "Did your highness truly say that?" Evelyn's piercing gaze coldly fixed on the elderly man before her. Back door. It appears that this third prince is poised to embarrass himself on his wedding day. The outcome hinges on whether Evelyn Carter is willing to be ridiculed. Right. The butler spoke with discomfort. His Royal Highness had indeed issued such directives. It was common knowledge that had the Emperor not personally sanctioned the marriage, the Royal Highness would not have wed the woman before him. Had it not been for this woman, the one the Royal Highness cherished, she would not have remained absent until now. All of this was merely a manifestation of the Royal Highness's resistance. Upon hearing that, Evelyn chuckled softly, not pausing for others to respond, as her delicate hand waved gracefully. If that is the case, please return and inform your Royal Highness that he does not wish to marry, and neither does Evelyn Carter. With a bright smile and a red veil fluttering in the wind, Evelyn's exquisite appearance was instantly unveiled. Under the astonished gazes of onlookers, she confidently made her way toward the bustling market. Her delicate makeup accentuated her eyes, which bore no trace of warmth, while her posture remained straight and proud. The stunning red wedding dress set her apart, making her exceptionally prominent in the crowd. This issue. No one anticipated Evelyn's actions. Everyone's eyes widened as they observed her departing figure in astonishment. Miss Lily Hart clearly did not anticipate Evelyn's shocking action. She exclaimed in surprise and quickly pursued her, her eyes brimming with concern. The market was vibrant, with everyone's attention focused on Evelyn as she spoke animatedly. Evelyn coldly disregarded the criticism surrounding her, advancing with resolute determination. Observing this, the elderly man swiftly pivoted and dashed toward the main hall, urgently informing Alexander Blake of the circumstances outside. The guests had all gathered, and in the prominent seat of the Grand Hall, the reigning emperor was seated. Beside him, Alexander Blake donned a striking red wedding dress, his expression somber, standing motionless. The butler, undeterred by the emperor's presence, leaned in close to Alexander Blake's ear and whispered, his face etched with concern. The emperor personally officiated the wedding, however, the bride fled in disdain. Where would they place the dignity of their Royal Highness? Upon receiving the butler's report, Alexander Blake's demeanor abruptly soured. His gaze shifted to the emperor's seat, devoid of any warmth. Initially, he had merely intended to create difficulties for that woman. Alexander Blake never anticipated that she would engage in such a ludicrous act. Signaling to the butler, Alexander Blake's expression soured as he surveyed the guests, the corner of his mouth twisting into a sardonic smile. Ms. Carter, the butler, having received instructions from Alexander Blake, promptly dispatched someone to pursue Evelyn following her departure. Fortunately, Evelyn was not moving at a rapid pace. After a short while, he managed to catch up with her and Lily Hart and called out to them. Halting in her tracks, Evelyn gazed expressionlessly at the servant obstructing her path and offered a cold smile. Miss Carter, the butler has instructed me to escort you back to the mansion. Under Evelyn's frigid and imposing gaze, the servant could not suppress his trembling. Resolutely, he recited the butler's instructions verbatim to the unyielding woman before him. Mockingly laughing, Evelyn remained motionless, devoid of any movement. They claimed she would retreat, so she was expected to retreat? How absurd! Evelyn cast a fleeting glance at the servant, disregarded him, and proceeded to walk past him as she readied herself to depart. Good afternoon, Miss Carter. The butler trailing behind observed Evelyn's actions and promptly intervened to prevent her departure. The auspicious moment was approaching. If anything were to go awry now and the emperor held her accountable, who would be able to shoulder the consequences? Miss Carter, what transpired just now was the fault of this old servant, and I implore you not to hold this old servant accountable. Observe, the auspicious moment is nearly upon us. The emperor himself has personally granted the marriage, yet the bride is nowhere to be found. If the emperor becomes exceedingly displeased, the butler lifted his gaze, scrutinizing Evelyn's expression with care, his tone imbued with embarrassment. Evelyn frowned, her keen gaze directed at the elderly man before her with the precision of a blade. Internally, she scoffed. His implication was clear: it was difficult to defy the imperial decree. In the past, Evelyn would have been impervious to such threats. However, she now resided in a dynasty where the emperor's word constituted the law. She possessed no authority to refuse. Suddenly, a sense of unease emerged within him. The inhabitants of the prince's mansion were certainly not ordinary. Miss Lily Hart listened to the butler and felt a wave of concern. Although the recent actions of the prince's mansion had provoked considerable anger, they had already provided the stairs, and the emperor was still awaiting his turn. Lily Hart was genuinely apprehensive that her young lady's temper might erupt, leading her to disregard everything else. Take the lead. With a detached demeanor, Evelyn, following the butler's lead, straightened her posture and proceeded toward Prince's mansion. There are certain matters that cannot be resisted, therefore, allow events to unfold naturally. A subtle smile graced Evelyn's delicate features. Chapter 6. Well, water does not interfere with river water. Prince's mansion was adorned with red lanterns, swaying in the breeze, while the sounds of the crowd created a lively atmosphere. The excitement surrounding the third prince's mansion at that moment was palpable, yet it failed to reach Alexander Blake, who sat in the main hall. His expression remained icy, and amidst the chorus of congratulations, it grew even more frigid. In a stunning wedding gown, her posture upright and dignified, Evelyn's exquisite visage danced in the breeze, captivating the guests lining the street. With each resolute step, she advanced steadily, her expression remaining impassive throughout the journey. Only the tension in her features betrayed her emotions as she was supported by Lily Hart, making her way toward the main hall. Alexander Blake regarded the woman approaching him with a frigid gaze, the corner of his mouth twisting into a sardonic smile. The servant presented the dark red silk to the two individuals. Evelyn extended her hand to grasp it. At either end of the silk, one was serene and collected, while the other was aloof and severe. It was evident to all that neither of them was pleased in the slightest. It appeared that this wedding held no significance for them whatsoever. Everyone exchanged glances, and the atmosphere abruptly turned awkward. Let us commence. As everyone exchanged glances, the man seated in the primary position spoke slowly in a subdued tone, his piercing gaze fixed on Evelyn. The individual occupying the principal seat was the reigning Emperor Edward Blake, his lips firmly pressed together. Since Evelyn's arrival at the prince's mansion, he had observed a transformation in the frigid demeanor of this woman, Evelyn Carter. A surge of astonishment welled up within Edward Blake's heart. Waving his hand, Edward Blake sat upright, signaling the officiant beside him to commence the wedding ceremony. Your Highness, the propitious moment has arrived. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat, then turned to Alexander Blake and addressed him with a frigid tone. The sound of firecrackers erupted, enveloping the prince's mansion in a festive ambience. The ceremonial music resonated, its lively melody touching the hearts of all present. First, bow to the heavens and the earth. Following the master of ceremonies' words, Evelyn grasped the red silk firmly with both hands and, under Alexander Blake's helpless gaze, turned and bowed to heaven and earth. As she lowered her head, the corner of Evelyn's mouth twisted into a sardonic smile. Paying homage to heaven and earth was simple, it merely required a bow. Second, bow to the main hall. Looking up, Alexander Blake's icy stare settled on Evelyn beside him. Despite his reluctance, compelled by the master of ceremonies, he could only resignedly turn and bow toward Edward Blake, who was seated in the main hall. Husband and wife bow. This ceremony, set against a conservative backdrop where divorce is uncommon, had already dictated Evelyn's future, whether favorable or unfavorable, leaving her without a choice in the matter. Evelyn stood tall, suppressing a sigh within her heart. Although she hesitated briefly, it was only for a moment before she bent down. A pang of sorrow struck her. She had now become the third princess in the eyes of the world, and from this point forward, there was no alternative. Alexander Blake stood rigidly, his cold, emotionless gaze fixed on Evelyn, who was bent over before him. Alexander, Edward Blake surveyed the situation before him, cleared his throat, and felt compelled to remind them. The entire hall was filled with guests awaiting his address. Was he intending to allow the emperor to lose face? Daniel Reed, standing beside him, was equally impatient and could not resist winking at Alexander Blake. The corner of his mouth twisted into a sardonic smile as his tall figure, under the scrutiny of all, gradually bent down. His eyes brimmed with reluctance. The imperial decree was not to be defied. He desired my submission, and so I complied. Seeing that Alexander Blake had finally acquiesced, a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. The onlookers raised their gazes, cautiously scrutinizing the emperor's demeanor. Silence enveloped the gathering. Although it was evident to all that the third prince was reluctant to marry, he found himself in a position of inevitability. The ceremony has concluded, escort her to the bridal chamber. Following the master of ceremonies' announcement, Evelyn exhaled in relief, finally able to escape this stifling environment. From Alexander Blake's demeanor and expressions, Evelyn discerned that this third prince was akin to her. In this wedding, he possessed no agency whatsoever. He did not wish to marry her, which was fortunate, as she harbored no desire for marriage either. Henceforth, the two of them could regard each other as respectful guests. Lily Hart observed this, swiftly approached Evelyn, grasped her hand, and proceeded toward the bridal chamber that had been arranged in the prince's mansion. Sitting comfortably on the bed, Evelyn surveyed her surroundings, her gaze lingering on the wedding decorations, a sarcastic smile curling at the corner of her mouth. At that moment, the vibrant red hue before her pierced her eyes. The wedding, imposed upon her, felt absurd. She experienced none of the joy typically associated with a bride. The sky slowly darkened, the red candlelight flickered, and several hours had elapsed. Evelyn maintained her posture, sitting upright on the edge of the bed, her expression cold and devoid of emotion. Lily Hart, having complied with Evelyn's wishes, had long since departed, leaving her alone in the room. Boom! A resounding crash emanated from the door. Lazily lifting her gaze, Evelyn observed the individual entering at a leisurely pace. It was Alexander Blake. In an instant, he donned a striking red wedding ensemble and swiftly approached Evelyn, standing above her and gazing down. His piercing and intense gaze betrayed resentment. Alexander Blake's fierce stare was fixed on the woman seated on the bed, his expression suggesting a desire to rend Evelyn apart. Alexander Blake's heart brimmed with hatred and disdain for Evelyn. Had it not been for this woman, the girl he loved would not have departed, and now she is missing. Evelyn Carter. A chilling voice resonated above Evelyn's head. Before she could respond, Alexander Blake's substantial hand had already gripped her delicate chin with force, a malevolent glimmer flickering in his eyes. Do not assume that marrying him will fulfill all your desires. An illegitimate daughter, scorned by society, is of no concern to him. Alexander Blake. Compelled to gaze directly into the eyes of the man before her, Evelyn instinctively sensed the contempt and malice reflected in his gaze. A sardonic smile emerged on her exquisite face. Do not assume that merely because you have made significant efforts to marry into the prince's mansion, you will lead a fulfilling life. With a resonant voice, Alexander Blake exerted force, and a crimson mark promptly emerged on Evelyn's fair chin. In stark contrast to Alexander Blake's contemptuous and malevolent demeanor, Evelyn exuded tranquility, her clear gaze unwaveringly meeting Alexander Blake's ominous stare. Suddenly, Evelyn smiled radiantly. She had not anticipated this wedding. Her sole motivation for marrying here was to escape the confines of her former life as Evelyn Carter and embark on a new chapter. Absurd! You have no desire to marry, nor do I, Evelyn Carter, have any eagerness for marriage. Raising her hand to free herself from Alexander Blake's firm grip, Evelyn gazed defiantly at the man before her. Do not forget, the moment you rejected me at the door, I stated, I, Evelyn Carter, do not wish to marry. Now, it is you who has sent someone to retrieve me to finalize this wedding. What do you mean by that? Even if he is unhappy, it is his own responsibility. Evelyn's words drained the color from Alexander Blake's face, his eyes fixed on her with a fierce intensity. This woman, it appeared, was not as the rumors suggested, weak and timid. Alexander Blake, I wish to make it unequivocally clear today that I am aware of your unwillingness to marry me. My marriage here is solely for the sake of peace. Evelyn gazed intently at the man before her, offering a charming smile. She then turned, maintaining a straight posture, and gracefully seated herself in a nearby chair, candidly articulating her thoughts. This marriage is unwanted by both parties, therefore, it is best to clarify matters. From this point forward, our paths will not intersect, each will pursue their own course. Alexander Blake, from this moment forward, you and I shall be strangers cohabiting under the same roof, refraining from any interference with one another, understood? Evelyn's purpose in marrying here was clear, she was indifferent to the reasons behind Evelyn Carter's prior agreement to this union. From Alexander Blake's demeanor, it was evident that he did not love her, in fact, he harbored feelings of animosity towards her. Nevertheless, Evelyn remained unafraid, her sole desire was to live peacefully within this dynasty, and she chose not to concern herself with anything beyond that. Hearing Evelyn speak, Alexander Blake offered a cold smile, his eyes sharp and frigid as he regarded her. No interference. Was that the reason she married him? Did she truly believe that he, Alexander Blake, was a fool? Investing so much effort in pleading with the Emperor for her marriage, compelling the person she loved to depart, dedicating so much time and energy to scheming and strategizing, all for that? Evelyn Carter, what are you doing? This king has no desire to know. You should be aware that from the moment you enter the prince's mansion through marriage, you will not experience a single day of tranquility. This king has ample time to methodically torment you and ensure you face the consequences. With a disdainful snort, Alexander Blake cast a contemptuous glance at Evelyn before, with a somber expression, he waved his sleeve and departed. Observing Alexander Blake's retreating figure, Evelyn offered a faint smile. While she did not grasp the significance of his words, his look of disdain made it clear that their paths would not cross again, which she found quite agreeable. Regarding his comments on torture and the associated costs, Evelyn remained indifferent, she dismissed his claims. As a modern individual of the 21st century, she felt ill-equipped to contend with him, a figure from antiquity. If he possessed such abilities, she would simply wait and observe. Observing her surroundings, Evelyn abruptly rose, approached the vibrant red bed, gently closed her eyes, and succumbed to sleep while still dressed. Chapter 7, Evelyn Carter is not a weak individual. Having been married into Prince's mansion for over a month, Evelyn Carter had not seen Alexander Blake since that day. It appeared as though the mansion remained unchanged by her presence. Evelyn felt content with the current circumstances. Alexander Blake's absence brought her a sense of ease, which she found quite satisfactory. From the second day of her arrival at the prince's mansion, Evelyn had already acquired comprehensive knowledge about her surroundings. Alexander Blake, the current third prince of the Ming dynasty, enjoyed considerable favor from the emperor. His mansion housed 4 concubines. Due to Alexander Blake's aloofness towards her following their marriage, Evelyn had yet to encounter any of those concubines. Today, Evelyn was enjoying a leisurely sunbath in the yard when, unexpectedly, a loud shout emanated from the courtyard door. Evelyn Carter. Evelyn lazily lifted her gaze, regarding the man who abruptly appeared before her with an impassive expression, the corner of her mouth subtly curling into a faint smile. Only to see Alexander Blake approaching Evelyn with a somber expression, he appeared extremely angry, his entire demeanor radiating a chilling aura, his striking features unmistakably conveying the fury within. Behind Alexander Blake, Daniel Reed trailed with a look of concern. Observing his furious demeanor, he couldn't suppress a sigh within. Evelyn languidly reclined against the elongated, narrow table, unfazed by Alexander Blake's presence, her icy gaze fixed directly upon his tall stature. Evelyn Carter. Alexander Blake disregarded Evelyn's demeanor at that moment. He took a long stride and positioned himself before her, gazing down at her calm and composed expression, the veins on her forehead protruding, his piercing black eyes fixed intently on Evelyn. "Damn it!" With a thunderous shout, Alexander Blake advanced and seized Evelyn Carter by the collar, his expression suggesting an immediate desire to end her life. The slender figure was firmly grasped by Alexander Blake. Evelyn narrowed her eyes, coldly regarding the hand that clutched her. A hint of discontent flickered in her gaze. Daniel Reed, positioned behind, observed this and swiftly felt compelled to intervene and prevent Alexander Blake from losing control. After many years of acquaintance, he recognized that Alexander Blake was teetering on the brink of fury and could easily succumb to his emotions, potentially harming Evelyn. Concerned gazes were directed at Evelyn. Despite Daniel Reed's disapproval of her methods, he could not remain passive while Alexander Blake jeopardized his sanity by openly challenging the Emperor's dignity. "Turn," Evelyn coldly articulated her desire for Alexander Blake to release her. Before she could complete her sentence, a slap struck her face. The sharp sound of the impact echoed, causing Evelyn's body to tense, rendering her immobile. Her pale cheeks quickly became swollen, marked by 5 clear handprints. The acute pain on her cheek and the metallic taste of blood in her mouth altered Evelyn's expression. She lifted her head, her icy gaze locking onto Alexander Blake's enraged eyes. "You scoundrel!" Alexander Blake's tall figure exuded an uncontrollable rage, his bloodshot eyes fiercely glared at the woman who met his gaze. The anger within him intensified as he raised his hand and delivered another forceful slap. Daniel Reed observed Alexander Blake's erratic behavior and felt compelled to intervene, but it was too late. He could only watch helplessly as events unfolded before him. As the fierce slap loomed, Evelyn's eyes glinted with cold determination. She raised her hand, swiftly intercepting Alexander Blake's strike with her petite hand. "Alexander Blake, are you out of your mind?" Effortlessly deflecting Alexander Blake's slap, Evelyn exclaimed vociferously. She could withstand a single slap, but she would categorically not tolerate insults from the same individual. If he, Alexander Blake, believed she was an easy target for bullying, he was sorely mistaken. For eyes locked in a gaze, Evelyn stared boldly into Alexander Blake's somber eyes, the corner of her mouth twisting into an increasingly sardonic smile. Alexander Blake's dark eyes narrowed as he glared at the hand that Evelyn had obstructed, fury igniting within him. "Alexander Blake, if you wish to act irrationally, kindly keep your distance from me. This space of mine is not a sanctuary for rabid dogs to attack others." Coldly withdrawing her hand from Alexander Blake's grasp, Evelyn adjusted her slightly disheveled attire and stepped back. The dull ache on her cheek caused Evelyn to frown, a hint of discomfort welling up within her. "If you wish to lose your composure, why do you approach her?" Evelyn's actions intensified the lethal aura surrounding Alexander Blake, causing his entire being to exude a chilling presence that sent shivers down the spines of those nearby. Evelyn exhibited no fear whatsoever. She lifted her head confidently, her icy gaze fixed on the man before her, resembling a devil, while a sense of amusement stirred within her. Daniel Reed clearly did not anticipate that Evelyn would have the audacity to provoke Alexander Blake's ire in such a manner. He could not help but regard Evelyn with surprise in his heart. This woman exudes a sense of leisure. Daniel Reed cautiously advanced, interjecting before Alexander Blake could succumb to anger, striving to regain his faltering composure. The icy clarity of Evelyn's gaze instilled a profound sense of admiration within Daniel Reed. Incidentally, disregarding Daniel Reed's remarks, Alexander Blake erupted in fury, not pausing for Evelyn's response. His imposing figure abruptly surged in front of her, and his large hand clamped around her neck, his 5 icy fingers tightening their grip. A cold light emanated from his eyes, his expression darkening as he contemplated annihilating the contemptible woman before him, the one who had caused harm to the girl he had cherished throughout his life. The abrupt action took Evelyn by surprise. Upon reacting, she experienced only a struggle to breathe. Evelyn was filled with dread at the icy breath emanating from Alexander Blake. She was uncertain of what she had done to provoke such anger in him. Without hesitation, Evelyn's icy gaze met Alexander Blake's directly. Her small, delicate face retained an air of composure. "Blake, Alexander Blake, if you possess the courage, then suffocate me to death." The air in her mouth grew increasingly sparse, rendering Evelyn's words intermittent, her delicate face flushed crimson from oxygen deprivation. Evelyn struggled to speak, her eyes brimming with animosity. If he had the capacity, he would surely strangle her to death today. Otherwise, this day, Evelyn Carter would unequivocally reclaim every ounce of what Alexander Blake had inflicted upon her. Increasing the pressure of his grip, the veins in his arm bulged prominently. Provoked by Evelyn's words, Alexander Blake descended into a frenzy. His massive hand ruthlessly constricted around Evelyn's neck, a predatory gleam igniting in his eyes. As long as he eliminates this wretched individual, all the anguish his cherished daughter has endured can be avenged. "Alexander, release your grip." Observing this, Daniel Reed swiftly positioned himself in front of Alexander Blake, interposing both hands to shield against his formidable grasp. He was bewildered. This woman had been personally assigned by the Emperor to Alexander Blake's side. If there were any errors, how could he justify them to the Emperor? "Alexander, release her. Have you forgotten the Emperor's words? You must not touch this woman now." Seeing Evelyn's eyes grow pale, Daniel Reed felt utterly defeated. He gestured toward Alexander Blake, attempting to restore his composure. He understood that losing the woman he loved inflicted deep pain on Alexander's heart, yet this woman had the Emperor's protection. They could not approach her for the time being. Daniel Reed's hand effectively halted Alexander Blake, who, in a fit of rage, released Evelyn. His eyes remained filled with fury as he glared at the woman seated on the ground, his chest rising and falling with the intensity of his anger. Had Daniel Reed not intervened, he would have unhesitatingly broken this woman's neck. Cough, cough. The diminutive figure sat on the ground. Evelyn had just been liberated when she was seized by a cough, a sharp pain radiating from her throat. It was evident that Alexander Blake had exerted all his strength, aiming to bring about her demise. Crazy. After coughing for an extended period, Evelyn sensed her breathing becoming easier, and her pale complexion gradually returned to its normal hue. Raising her head, she angrily reproached the man before her. This man rushed in front of her and, without uttering a word, assaulted her with the ferocity of a madman, making it truly difficult to comprehend. "One day, I will take your life as a sacrifice to Sophia." Alexander Blake's expression was icy and intense, his clenched fists betraying his current anger. Slap. Evelyn gradually regained her composure, lifted her hand, and delivered a slap to Alexander Blake. This slap was a response to the one he had just delivered to her. Evelyn Carter had never been a feeble individual. If someone offered her something, she would undoubtedly reciprocate. "Alexander Blake, if you do not provoke me, I shall not provoke you. Should you provoke me, I will assuredly retaliate. I, Evelyn Carter, am not feeble. Regardless of how others treat me, I will undoubtedly repay them in kind." Standing tall and resolute, Evelyn disregarded Alexander Blake's lethal stare. Alexander Blake's striking visage was turned to one side due to Evelyn's slap, and the frigid aura emanating from his entire being intensified further. Daniel Reed was present, along with Alexander Blake, who was taken aback by Evelyn's audacity to slap him, finding the act utterly unimaginable. "Alexander Blake, I am unaware of what you are referring to, nor do I comprehend your obsession. Now, leave my presence at once." Slender fingers gestured toward the door, a frigid voice impolitely commanded the guests to leave. Now, he has inflicted enough harm upon her, lost his sanity sufficiently, can he finally remove himself from her presence? Alexander, seizing the opportunity just before Alexander Blake succumbed to madness, Daniel Reed advanced and grasped his shoulder, forcibly leading him away. In that moment of uncertainty, he had not anticipated that Alexander Blake would entirely lose his sanity. Forcibly pulling Alexander Blake away, Daniel Reed regarded Evelyn with contemplation before vanishing from her view. Observing Alexander Blake's retreating silhouette, a sardonic smile emerged on Evelyn's face. The searing pain radiated from her cheek, leaving Evelyn feeling cold. Her slender hands were clenched, with her long fingers digging deeply into her flesh. Alexander Blake, I will explore your additional capabilities. Chapter 8 The Concubine in the Palace, Miss. After Alexander Blake was forcibly removed by Daniel Reed, Evelyn Carter turned and made her way back to the bedroom. Gazing at the vivid red five-finger imprint in the bronze mirror, a malevolent glimmer flickered in her eyes. Alexander Blake, today's affront, Evelyn Carter, I will eventually reclaim it. Lily Hart carefully opened the door, approached Evelyn, and called out softly. Upon seeing Evelyn's red and swollen cheeks, she quickly moved closer to assess the situation. Raising her hand to halt Lily Hart's movement, Evelyn gradually averted her gaze, her expression remaining impassive. This gesture instilled a sense of fear in Lily Hart, prompting her to lower her eyelids, too intimidated to utter a word. Lily Hart, what troubles you? Evelyn parted her red lips slightly, glancing at the maid beside her, who wore a frightened expression. The corners of her mouth lifted into a subtle smile, which instantly dispelled the fear in Lily Hart's heart, bringing a smile to her small face. Mrs. Charlotte Moore and Mrs. Isabella Moore request an audience and are presently awaiting at Heavenly Hall. Under Evelyn's gentle gaze, Lily Hart relinquished her fear, and a radiant smile graced her face. Hearing this, Evelyn raised her eyebrows, and the corners of her mouth curved upward slightly. It appeared that today was indeed lively. If she was not mistaken, the Charlotte Moore and Isabella Moore referenced by Lily Hart were likely two of Alexander Blake's four concubines. Evelyn smiled with comprehension. It is often said that once one enters a monkey's door, the depths are as profound as the ocean. A month of tranquility was disrupted by the arrival of Alexander Blake today. Reflecting on this, Evelyn experienced a sense of disquiet. Let us proceed. Evelyn, providing instructions to Lily Hart from behind, promptly made her way to Heavenly Hall, with Lily Hart hastily trailing after her. Gracefully entering the main hall, I observed a woman with her hair styled in a high bun reminiscent of Lu Yun, adorned in a light-colored dress featuring Tuat-Lai Phuong accents, complemented by a celestial water dress intricately embroidered with water waves and butterflies. She held a golden silk fan embellished with glitter, gently waving it while smiling and engaging in cheerful conversation with another woman clad in a vibrant red dress embroidered with peonies. Observing this, Evelyn Carter let out a cold sneer, straightened her posture, and approached the main seat with deliberate steps. Evelyn's presence disrupted the conversation between the two individuals. They turned their heads, unable to resist gazing at Evelyn, who occupied the central seat. Her eyes radiated contempt and disdain. Charlotte Moore, present to welcome you, sister. My concubine, Isabella Moore, has come to greet you, elder sister. The two exchanged glances, their voices soft and melodic. Mouth expressed that sentiment, yet the body remained still, while the eyes provocatively regarded Evelyn, laughing. Evelyn's gaze gradually settled on the two individuals, the corner of her mouth curling into a sardonic smile. Their actions were so transparent that it was impossible for Evelyn to miss their implications. Nevertheless, she maintained an impassive expression, her deep, piercing eyes fixed intently upon them. Initially, on the second day after my elder sister's arrival, I was expected to pay my respects. However, the prince mentioned that my elder sister prefers tranquility and wishes to avoid disturbances, so I hope she will not hold this against me. Noticing Evelyn's reluctance to engage in conversation, Isabella Moore, attired in pink, lowered her fan, a feigned smile lingering on her delicate features. The entirety of the prince's mansion was aware that the prince did not genuinely wed the woman before him. He had not only been indifferent towards her on their wedding night, but throughout the entire month, he had not inquired even once about Evelyn Carter. Indeed, indeed. Charlotte Moore chuckled in agreement, her eyes casting a contemptuous glance at Evelyn, and the smile on her face broadened. Slender hands delicately cradled her chin as Evelyn languidly regarded the two women before her, her eyes brimming with impatience. "You both have already paid your respects, please depart." With a gentle wave of her hand, Evelyn's face remained expressionless as she coldly instructed the guests to depart, entirely disregarding the two women who had come to feign. Having made his statement, he rose and began to depart without waiting for Charlotte Moore and Isabella Moore to respond. Evelyn's rude remarks left Charlotte Moore and Isabella Moore momentarily speechless. As they watched Evelyn depart, their expressions soured. They had not anticipated such discourtesy from Evelyn, nor her insistence on dismissing them. Evelyn Carter. Observing this, Isabella Moore vehemently intervened to prevent Evelyn from departing, her delicate features betraying her anger. Charlotte Moore's expression was equally dismal. She remained silent, merely casting an angry glare at Evelyn's back. Since their arrival at the prince's mansion, no one, aside from the prince himself, had dared to treat them with such disrespect. Evelyn's haughty demeanor thoroughly repulsed both of them. Turning around, Evelyn regarded the two with a frosty demeanor, silently anticipating their next remarks. "Who do you believe you are? You are merely a disregarded concubine, overlooked by the prince. What value do you possess?" Isabella Moore positioned herself before Evelyn, her voice laced with disdain and derision. "Everyone in the prince's mansion is aware that the prince married this woman, Evelyn Carter, with great reluctance. Had it not been for the current emperor personally sanctioning the union, she would merely be regarded as an illegitimate child, too ashamed to reveal her identity. What grounds does she have for such arrogance?" Isabella Moore. Charlotte Moore followed closely behind Isabella Moore, lightly tugging at her sleeve, her expression radiating joy. With a grave expression, Evelyn Carter remained silent, her icy gaze fixed directly on Isabella Moore, her entire demeanor radiating a frigid aura. As Evelyn glanced at Isabella Moore and Charlotte Moore, she felt indifferent, lifted her feet, and prepared to depart. Evelyn Carter, cease this immediately. Noticing that Evelyn was ignoring her, Isabella Moore observed her retreating form, extended both hands, seized Evelyn's sleeve, and shouted in anger. Lowering her gaze, Evelyn regarded Isabella Moore's hand, which was firmly clutching her sleeve, as the corner of her mouth twisted into a frigid smile. "Release." Evelyn issued a cold warning, never once directing her gaze toward Isabella Moore, her voice brimmed with impatience throughout. She was unwilling to squander time with these two women. Evelyn had exhausted her patience with Isabella Moore and Charlotte Moore. Isabella Moore clutched Evelyn's sleeve even more tightly, unwilling to release her grip. Lily Hart observed this with a look of concern on her face and was poised to speak. However, at Evelyn's gesture, she remained silent at the side, consumed by anxiety. Having resided at the prince's mansion for over a month, Lily Hart had become somewhat acquainted with the dynamics within the estate. It was rumored that Mrs. Charlotte Moore and Mrs. Isabella Moore were the prince's most favored companions. Today, they arrived, evidently feigning malevolence. Lily Hart was deeply concerned that her young lady would endure hardship. "Release." Evelyn's voice grew colder, her eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. The aura emanating from her clearly indicated her discomfort. If Isabella Moore did not relent, Evelyn would certainly not hold back. "Evelyn Carter, you are merely an illegitimate child residing in the Prime Minister's household. A person of your stature has little to take pride in." Isabella Moore regarded Evelyn with a frigid demeanor and a sardonic tone. With a sharp slap, Evelyn dislodged Isabella Moore's small hand from her sleeve. She raised her hand and struck Isabella Moore forcefully, her eyes brimming with fury. "Leave my presence immediately." Gradually retracting her hand, Evelyn spoke coldly, her piercing gaze fixed on the astonished Isabella Moore, a palpable aura of murderous intent surrounding her. Unintelligent woman. Gazing at Isabella Moore with disdain, Evelyn's heart brimmed with scorn. "You." Isabella Moore cradled her bruised cheek, gazing at Evelyn in disbelief, the ache in her face serving as a constant reminder of the assault she had just endured. Charlotte Moore was equally astonished, immobilized, and unable to comprehend the situation. It is rumored that Evelyn Carter possesses a timid disposition and lacks the confidence to speak assertively. Might it be possible that she has undergone a transformation in her demeanor today? Evelyn Carter, do you have the audacity to strike me? Isabella Moore screamed and lunged forward, her hand poised to strike Evelyn, but was effortlessly restrained by her. Two powerful hands firmly grasped Isabella Moore's small hand, which was raised in the air. Evelyn's eyes glimmered with lethal intent as her piercing gaze fixed upon Isabella Moore. Evelyn's icy stare instilled a profound sense of fear in Isabella Moore's heart. That piercing, frigid gaze was akin to a knife, slicing through her resolve incrementally. Isabella's complexion drained of color, and her delicate frame involuntarily quaked. Although I may not be esteemed within the Carter family, remember that I am the princess who was honorably wed by the prince in a sedan chair borne by 8 individuals. In terms of status and standing, you both have no authority to behave arrogantly in my presence. I caution you for the final time, do not show yourselves before me again, otherwise, it will not merely be a trivial reprimand. Depart. With a decisive wave of her hand, Evelyn cast aside Isabella Moore's body, her voice chillingly admonishing. Today, 2 women approached her, evidently intent on humiliating her. How foolish these romantic rivalries were, Evelyn Carter held them in the utmost disdain. She had no desire to engage, yet if these women persisted in their misguided challenge to her composure, she would not hesitate to make them regret their provocation. The icy stare, imbued with a subtle yet menacing intent, instilled a sense of panic in the hearts of Charlotte Moore and Isabella Moore. Following today's incident, they all recognized that Evelyn Carter was not as easily intimidated as the rumors suggested, they could not afford to provoke her. Isabella Moore. Charlotte Moore approached the irate Isabella Moore, steadied her swaying form, and conveyed a silent message through her gaze, urging her to temper her anger and refrain from provoking Evelyn further. Isabella Moore cast an angry glare at Evelyn Carter, however, under Charlotte Moore's scrutiny, she scoffed disdainfully, shot a fierce look at Evelyn, and then swept her sleeve as she departed. Miss Carter, no, Princess, I sincerely hope you can maintain your position as Princess. I believe that after your recent indiscretion, the Prince will not easily forgive you. Charlotte Moore trailed behind Isabella Moore. Upon passing Evelyn, she halted, turned around, smiled at Evelyn, and spoke softly. Frowning, Evelyn assessed Charlotte Moore, inquiring coldly. What do you imply? Evelyn Carter, if you wish to keep this a secret, you must handle it personally. Your cruelty and ruthlessness are evident. The king will not be lenient. Best of luck. Giving Evelyn a significant glance, Charlotte Moore covered her mouth and laughed softly, taking small steps as she gradually faded from Evelyn's view. Charlotte Moore's words struck a chord of alarm in Evelyn's heart. Could it be that Alexander Blake's furious visit today was connected to what Charlotte Moore had expressed? Smirking, Evelyn smiled nonchalantly, turned away, and departed. Chapter 9, The Lost Body. Late at night, Evelyn reclined on her back on the plush bed, her clear eyes fixed on the ceiling without blinking. The words of Charlotte Moore from earlier resonated in her mind, her eyebrows slightly furrowed as her crimson lips released a helpless sigh. As Evelyn surveyed her surroundings, a bitter smile formed on her lips. The environment felt alien, the dynasty unfamiliar, the people peculiar, everything was disconcerting. For reasons unknown, a deeper ache settled in her heart. She blinked, striving to suppress the tears that threatened to spill. Fatigue enveloped her as Evelyn gradually closed her eyes, yet she still dreamily perceived a pair of male legs materializing before her. A pair of jet-black boots approached, and Evelyn abruptly widened her eyes, her body springing up as she coldly regarded the approaching individual. Alexander Blake, what brings him here? Evelyn Carter. Alexander Blake spoke icily, his piercing gaze directed at the woman on the bed, radiating profound animosity. Evelyn disregarded Alexander Blake's gnashing of teeth, merely blinking as she coldly evaluated the man who had abruptly appeared before her. The corner of her mouth curled into a frigid smile, betraying not the slightest hint of emotion. Step by step toward the woman on the bed, Alexander Blake's entire being radiated a chilling aura, his clouded eyes brimming with animosity, as though Evelyn were his adversary, yearning to rush forward and rend her asunder. As Alexander Blake drew near, Evelyn Carter experienced a palpable pressure. Frowning, she detected a potent odor of alcohol emanating from him, and a look of disgust crossed her small, delicate face. This man rushed in front of me this morning in a frenzied manner, now he is intoxicated and causing trouble once more. Leave. As Alexander Blake's imposing figure loomed over Evelyn's petite frame, the scent of alcohol intensified with each step he took, causing her considerable discomfort. Gazing at Blake, Evelyn gestured for the guests to depart, her expression reflecting her distaste. The corner of Alexander Blake's mouth twisted into a chilling smile. He surged in front of Evelyn, his large, powerful hands firmly clutching hers. His handsome visage contorted into a grotesque and menacing expression, fueled by his fury. Evelyn Carter, this frustrating individual. Alexander Blake's expression was dark and menacing. He clenched his teeth and cursed the woman in front of him, his deep-set eyes glinting with a malevolent intensity. A sudden pain radiated from her wrist. Evelyn scowled and glanced up at the irate Alexander Blake, her demeanor discontented. What on earth is the matter? Her hands writhed with all her strength, attempting to break free from Alexander Blake's grip, but it was futile. The more she fought, the more he tightened his hold. Soon, her wrists became red and swollen. Damn it, Evelyn cursed inwardly. This body's constitution was far too frail. Alexander Blake, if you wish to act irrationally, please remove yourself from my presence. Frustrated by her inability to free her hands, Evelyn lifted her head and glared intensely at the man before her, her narrowed eyes instantly becoming icy. Incidentally, Alexander Blake erupted in fury, raising his hand to deliver a forceful slap to Evelyn's face. In an instant, 5 vivid red handprints marked her fair complexion. Evelyn's petite frame was propelled onto the bed by the force, causing her forehead to collide with the bed frame, resulting in an immediate and significant swelling. Before Evelyn could respond, Alexander Blake lifted her body. Alexander Blake, what on earth are you doing? Evelyn was taken aback by Alexander Blake's forceful slap. Her eyes brimmed with resentment as she gazed at the aggressive man before her. Blood trickled slowly from the corner of her mouth, and the metallic scent filled her senses. Her cheeks were flushed and swollen, and she was in distress. Evelyn cursed vehemently, her gaze fixed intently on Alexander Blake. Evelyn's roar served to intensify the flames of anger. Alexander Blake's already intense fury surged further. His complexion drained of color. Combined with the effects of alcohol, Alexander Blake's malevolent gaze became bloodshot, and the murderous intent within his eyes began to crystallize. Boom! Evelyn's petite frame was forcefully hurled onto the cold floor by Alexander Blake, eliciting a surge of excruciating pain. Before Evelyn could respond, Alexander Blake's eyes blazed with fury as he stormed in front of her, lifted his leg, and delivered a kick to the individual sprawled on the floor. Kicks descended upon Evelyn as Alexander Blake struck her relentlessly, leaving her eyes swollen and red, each blow fueled by his full force. It is entirely your responsibility, you must dedicate your life to Sophia. Alexander Blake's eyes were chilling and menacing, his legs unwavering in their strength as he roared in fury, his gaze intensely fierce. Evelyn Carter bit her lower lip firmly, suppressing any cries of pain. Her frail body endured Alexander Blake's brutal actions with helplessness, yet a glimmer of fierce determination shone in her eyes. Frustration coursed through her, this body was so weak that it could not fight back. Evelyn silently cursed her predicament. The pain radiated throughout her body, Evelyn yearned to resist but found herself powerless, forced to endure in silence. "I will harm you." Alexander Blake shouted loudly, crouched down, seized Evelyn's loose hair with fierce intensity, placed one hand on her neck, and ruthlessly applied pressure to strangle her pale neck. At that moment, Alexander Blake was consumed by murderous intent, the veins on his forehead bulging. The mere thought of his beloved dying due to the woman before him ignited a fierce anger within him, prompting him to act without mercy. In his fury, he lost all reason, driven solely by the desire to kill Evelyn in retribution for the loss of his loved one. Breathing heavily, Evelyn rolled her eyes in exasperation, feeling a sense of suffocation as her clear gaze, filled with animosity, fixed upon Alexander Blake like a furious lion confronting its prey. "You would be better off strangling me to death, otherwise, I will undoubtedly kill you." With great difficulty articulating her thoughts, Evelyn sensed the air in her chest becoming increasingly scarce. Her small, delicate face flushed crimson from the struggle to breathe, and a wave of pain coursed through her throat. She opened her eyes wide, glaring with intensity. Alexander Blake tightened his grip, his hands clenching more firmly as his cold gaze locked onto Evelyn's resentful stare, instantly kindling the flames of anger within him. "You are insufferable." Roaring in fury, Alexander Blake gasped as he abruptly released his grip on Evelyn's neck. His reason returned instantly upon meeting her furious gaze, recalling Daniel Reed's warning that this woman had the Emperor's support, rendering him momentarily immobile. But as soon as he recalled the news of Sophia Quinn's tragic death, his heart swelled with rage. Fueled by murderous intent, Alexander Blake advanced step by step, like an Asura from hell, darkly approaching Evelyn. A saccharine flavor surged in her throat as bright red liquid gradually trickled from the corner of her mouth, causing Evelyn's body to weakly collapse to the ground. "Evelyn Carter, you have the audacity to send someone to assassinate Sophia. This king will not allow you to escape unscathed." Sitting down, Alexander Blake seized Evelyn's hair with intensity, compelling her to meet his gaze. Observing Evelyn's wretched state at that moment, a surge of vengeance welled up within him, and the corners of his mouth twisted into a malevolent smile. Frenzied canine. Rubbing her intensely painful throat, Evelyn opened her mouth with great difficulty. The agony radiating through her throat was excruciating. She realized that her throat must have sustained an injury. As she was compelled to look up at Alexander Blake, whose face appeared almost contorted, Evelyn gritted her teeth and muttered a curse. This man must eliminate her today, otherwise, one day, she will ensure he regrets not doing so. Eyes gleaming with a malevolent intensity, Evelyn defiantly stared at Alexander Blake, who was teetering on the brink of fury. "You audacious individual, you have the audacity to drug me." The intoxicating aroma enveloped his senses. Alexander Blake felt an overwhelming heat coursing through his body. Strangely, the fragrance emanating from Evelyn left his mouth parched, intensifying the sensation of burning throughout him. "Evelyn Carter, your scheming and cunning nature in pursuit of marrying me is evident. You dare to employ such cruel tactics. Do you not desire my favor? This evening, I shall grant your wish." His expression shifted, Alexander Blake's eyes were bloodshot, and he clenched his teeth with every word as he slowly approached Evelyn. His icy voice penetrated her ears, instilling an indescribable chill. "Please leave me alone." Evelyn shouted furiously at Alexander Blake, entirely failing to grasp the significance of his words. She employed both hands to push against the man who was advancing toward her. Oddly, Evelyn felt her entire body soften and grow warm. A subtle fragrance of purity lingered in the air. Evelyn's eyes widened in disbelief. "Isn't this what you desired, Evelyn Carter? Killing Sophia and even drugging this king? This king will gradually settle this debt with you, you wretched woman." Alexander Blake experienced a pervasive discomfort throughout his body, accompanied by an escalating heat. His breathing grew increasingly labored, and his lower abdomen felt both warm and taut, creating an urgent need for relief. The insults provoked Evelyn's intense anger, prompting her to raise her hand and strike Alexander Blake. Alexander Blake, leave this place, depart. It felt as though thousands of insects were gnawing at her entire body. Evelyn experienced profound discomfort and struggled to maintain her composure. Her face was flushed, cold sweat dripped incessantly from her forehead, and her rapid breathing intertwined with that of Alexander Blake. "You are insufferable." Alexander Blake's eyes were bloodshot, and his expression was both gloomy and menacing. This woman had audaciously slapped him twice in a single day. His body was becoming increasingly agitated, although he harbored anger towards Evelyn. Her breath, imbued with a subtle fragrance, was undeniably enticing, leaving him in a state of profound discomfort. "Please leave me alone." Evelyn spoke icily, her breathing increasingly rapid. She was genuinely uneasy. "I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that." The silky smooth path enveloped Alexander Blake's intense desire. Her tightness ignited within him a compelling urge to passionately express his longing within her. "Alexander Blake, one day, I shall end your life." Evelyn abruptly experienced pain, her complexion ashen. In the room, Evelyn's anguished scream echoed, her voice imbued with lethal intent. Chapter 10 Retribution. After a long night, Evelyn felt utterly fatigued. She could only recline on the bed and allow Alexander Blake to act as he pleased. The excruciating pain in her lower body radiated throughout her entire being. Evelyn's 5 slender fingers clutched the mattress beneath her as she closed her eyes and gritted her teeth. Addressing the man above her, she declared, "Alexander Blake, remember this moment. Today you have inflicted this humiliation upon me, and in the future, I, Evelyn, will undoubtedly repay it many times over." Alexander Blake was perspiring heavily. Beneath him was undoubtedly the woman he despised deeply, yet he experienced an unusual sense of satisfaction. Upon hearing her words, he merely scoffed with disdain, offering no response. The already sinister expression grew even more foreboding, as if releasing the hatred within his heart, and the movements below abruptly quickened. Evelyn Carter did not awaken until the sun had risen 3 poles high. The aged room lacked curtains, allowing rays of sunlight to seep through the cracks in the door. Evelyn squinted as she surveyed the unmade bed and the unfamiliar man lying beside her, both of which revealed the events of the previous night. She closed her eyes, and the moment she opened them, her gaze was bright yet brimming with intense hatred. The man before her was someone from whom she must reclaim what he had taken. As she immersed herself in contemplation, the man beside her stirred slightly, indicating the onset of wakefulness. Evelyn maintained her position, gazing at him unblinkingly, her striking eyes lacking any discernible emotion. It was evident that the two were sharing the same bed, yet they harbored a profound animosity towards one another, wishing they could raise their hands to eliminate each other. Evelyn suddenly felt a surge of bitterness. If that were the case, she might as well succumb to death at that man's hands at that moment. It appears that God is playfully toying with her, allowing her to evade the gates of hell. However, if she survives, she will thrive, and those who owe her will not be forgotten. "You shameless woman, why are you looking at me so early in the morning? Do you believe that after just one night, this king will alter his perception of you?" Alexander Blake opened his eyes to find Evelyn gazing at him. A surge of revulsion coursed through him, and the contempt on his face was unmistakable. "Absurd, I was just contemplating a method to eliminate you, Alexander Blake. Heed my words, I will not allow you to escape." The dispassionate words that escaped her lips startled Alexander Blake. This woman was undeniably peculiar. Wasn't it her desire to marry into the prince's mansion as a princess that drove her to attempt to eliminate Sophia Quinn by any means necessary? Now that her ambitions have been realized, she feigns victimhood. For whom is she performing? Alexander Blake scoffed disdainfully, donned his attire, positioned himself before the bed, and gazed down at Evelyn Carter, his eyes exhibiting an extreme coldness and indifference. He was initially a man of affection, but she took the life of the person he cherished, and his emotions vanished along with the demise of that girl. A harlot still wishes to arrange a chastity test. "Evelyn Carter, do not presume I am unaware, and do not think that just because the Emperor is shielding me, I will hesitate to act against you. Now that you are wed to the prince's mansion, I have ample time to seek retribution for my woman, just you wait. After making that statement, she waved her hand and departed. Evelyn Carter gazed at the corner of her dress fluttering by the door, feeling somewhat distracted. From Charlotte Moore yesterday to Alexander Blake today, it was evident that she had committed a grave misdeed in the past, but what precisely was it? Evelyn Carter reclined on the bed, lost in thought for an extended period, yet unable to conjure any ideas. She could not recall the memories of the individual who inhabited this body, she only sensed a profound absence of love, suggesting a significant underlying reason for it. "Miss, please awaken, it is nearly noon." Lily Hart entered the room, her eyes landing on the untidy bed and Evelyn Carter's wan visage, worry evident on her refined features. The relationship between the young master and the young lady was already strained. Despite having consummated their marriage the previous night, the young master's recent unhappy expression suggested that their rapport remained tenuous. Evelyn Carter gradually sat up, observed the facial cleanser that Lily Hart was holding, and composedly smiled at her. "Lily Hart, please prepare hot water for me, I would like to take a bath." Her voice was raspy, her throat parched. When Alexander Blake was present, she was so preoccupied with guarding against him that she failed to notice her throat's discomfort. Now that he has departed, she realizes, upon opening her mouth, that her throat is indeed quite uncomfortable. Lily Hart immediately recognized that something was amiss with Evelyn and promptly set aside the items she was holding. "Excuse me, are you all right?" "It's fine, you can prepare it for me." Evelyn Carter shook her head, her brows slightly furrowed. The scent of Alexander Blake still appeared to linger on her body, a sensation that made her quite uncomfortable. "Yes." Lily Hart turned to prepare hot water for Evelyn Carter, though she felt a twinge of concern. The royal palace was rife with gossip. If the young lady were to behave as she had at the Grand Chancellor's residence, without anyone to safeguard her, Lily feared she might find herself in trouble once more. Contemplating this, Lily Hart let out a sigh. She held no standing within the palace. Her only wish was for the young lady in the royal palace to remain safe and sound. Evelyn Carter had been married into the mansion for nearly a month, yet she had not consummated her union with the prince. Regardless of the servants' perceived ignorance, they would undoubtedly conclude that the prince and the main princess were not in accord. The princess lacked favor, and her close maidservants displayed little warmth. Fortunately, Evelyn Carter hailed from the Grand Chancellor's residence. Despite their disdain, they dared not act impulsively against her. However, these are exclusively for the servants. "Little girl, please come here and bring these potted plants indoors." Charlotte Moore gestured toward the saplings basking in the sunlight, fixed her gaze on Lily Hart, and issued commands. As she spoke, she instinctively lifted her chin, her demeanor exuding a distinct air of superiority. "Madam, I must still prepare a bath for our young lady." Lily Hart glanced uneasily at the meticulously tended potted plants, her shoulders slumping. She was acutely aware of the need to avoid offending anyone in the prince's mansion. A moment's carelessness could spell disaster for both the young lady and herself. "I find it peculiar that it's still early, yet you already wish to take a bath. Is there something amiss with your body?" Charlotte Moore cast a sidelong glance at the maid beside her. Rose Hart approached her quietly and assisted her in rising. "Thank you for your concern, madam. The young lady is perfectly fine. It is simply that last night, the prince stayed at Azure Cloud Pavilion and rose a bit late this morning. Upon waking, he mentioned feeling slightly unwell, so he requested that I prepare hot water for a bath." Lily Hart's gaze fell upon her nose, while her nose regarded her heart. From a young age, she had attended to the young lady in the mansion. Having encountered numerous nobles with capricious temperaments, she instinctively understood what to say and what to withhold. Charlotte Moore's expression shifted dramatically upon hearing Lily Hart's words, a fierce glimmer swiftly igniting in her eyes. When Evelyn Carter married, the prince had never regarded her with any interest. Moreover, it was widely acknowledged that Evelyn Carter was not in the prince's favor. What prompted the prince to remain at Azure Cloud Pavilion yesterday? Alexander, where did you go last night while intoxicated? I searched the entire mansion but was unable to locate you. Daniel Reed stood before Alexander Blake's desk, a slight frown on his face. Alexander Blake's study room was expansive, airy, and well-lit. The walls were adorned with several paintings and calligraphy, clearly the work of a renowned master. Additionally, the study room featured a private area for him to rest when fatigued. Alexander Blake's complexion appeared unhealthy, and he still emitted the scent of alcohol. It seemed he had not changed his attire since the previous night. Yesterday evening. Alexander Blake reflected on last night's encounter with Evelyn Carter and felt an increasing sense of frustration. He had not anticipated becoming intimate with her while under the influence of alcohol. If Sophia were to discover that he had been with the woman who had caused her pain, would she be furious with him? Daniel Reed was an astute individual. Noticing Alexander Blake's pallid complexion, he recognized that further inquiry would be inappropriate. Despite his curiosity, he composedly shifted the topic of conversation. There has been no update regarding Sophia. As he spoke, a sigh escaped his lips. Noticing Alexander Blake's frown, which suggested impending anger, he swiftly intervened. Alexander, do not rush. No news is good news. His eyebrows were refined, his eyes shone like stars, and his jet-black gaze appeared capable of ensnaring the souls of onlookers, exuding an indescribable beauty. However, his expression was profoundly serious, accentuating his ethereal presence. What do you mean? Alexander Blake's eyes appeared slightly bloodshot, likely due to a restless night. We have yet to locate Sophia's body, indicating that she is most likely still alive. We simply have not discovered her yet, so please do not lose hope. That was all he could articulate, he could not express anything further. After all, he was uncertain whether Sophia Quinn was alive or deceased at that moment. If he offered excessive reassurance, only to discover that Sophia Quinn had long since passed away, wouldn't that constitute an even greater disappointment for him? Alexander Blake averted his gaze, appearing to contemplate Daniel Reed's remarks. It seemed he found merit in what was said, and his demeanor noticeably brightened. There is only one aspect that eludes my comprehension. A profound look of confusion filled his eyes. He rose and gazed at Daniel Reed, perplexed, and remarked, at that time, Evelyn Carter sought to marry into the prince's mansion, even resorting to despicable tactics to harm Sophia. Now, she presents herself as being compelled to marry him. No matter how hard I try, I cannot comprehend it. It is truly bewildering. In Daniel Reed's mind, the clear, calm eyes of Evelyn Carter emerged. For some reason, he had a vague sense that this matter was unrelated to Evelyn Carter. Daniel? Alexander Blake regarded Daniel Reed with suspicion, as though he had been summoning him for an extended period. What are you contemplating? I have been calling you for quite some time, yet you still have not regained your composure. Nothing. At this moment, he was uncertain of anything. Naturally, he could not speak recklessly without evidence. Furthermore, Alexander Blake was currently singularly devoted to Sophia Quinn, harboring deep resentment for Evelyn Carter. Even if he were to voice his thoughts, it is likely that she would not heed them. If there is nothing further, I will return to my room to change my attire. Your scent resembles that of alcohol, which makes me feel uneasy. He concluded his remarks with a jest, lowered his head to inhale the scent of his arm, and pressed his thin lips together. Daniel Reed regarded him with a somewhat youthful expression and offered a faint smile. Daniel, Sophia's situation has been weighing on you, you know I cannot afford to lose track of her. At last, Alexander Blake's somewhat melancholic voice faded away at the door. Chapter 11, Satire. Evelyn Carter waited in the waiting room for an extended period before Lily Hart finally returned. She assumed that some unforeseen circumstance must have caused the delay, so she refrained from asking many questions, opted to change her clothes, and took a shower. "Very well, you may go out first." Despite having been attended to by Lily Hart for an extended period, he remained uncomfortable with the idea of being unclothed in her presence. "Miss, I notice you are fatigued. Allow Lily Hart to remain and assist you with your bath." "I am capable of managing on my own. You should go downstairs and rest." Evelyn Carter shook her head and declined without hesitation. Although she was now Miss Carter, she remained Vanessa Carter, a 21st-century assassin. Her conduct necessitated a level of caution that surpassed that of others. Allowing someone to approach her in such an unprotected state was unprecedented. Lily Hart observed Evelyn Carter's resolute refusal and chose not to comment further. The young lady's demeanor had shifted significantly since her awakening. After several days of following her, Lily had gradually acclimated to this change. Then this attendant will step aside and guard the door for the young lady. Should the young lady have any requests, she may simply call for Lily Hart. Lily Hart bowed respectfully and withdrew. Evelyn Carter had initially planned to allow her to leave. She was merely taking a bath and did not require her presence. However, a sudden thought crossed her mind: what if Alexander Blake exploited her moment of inattention and entered the bathroom? While Lily Hart, stationed at the door, would be unable to prevent him, she could at least offer a reminder. Rose petals are strewn across the water's surface. Bathing with rose petals can alleviate fatigue and enhance the skin's appearance. Surprisingly, their benefits were recognized in ancient times. The room was enveloped in steam, the tip of her nose faintly scented of roses. Evelyn Carter's entire body ached, yet she did not hesitate. She stepped into the bathtub, the water pleasantly warm. She let out a soft moan and contentedly closed her eyes. At this moment, she needed to indulge in enjoyment, setting aside thoughts of the man who had taken her life in a previous existence, dismissing any consideration of Alexander Blake, and ignoring the individuals in the Prime Minister's residence who sought to intimidate her. She has never been the type to engage in bullying. They have the audacity to taunt her. Even if it means risking her life, she is determined to reclaim it. Contemplating this, Evelyn Carter abruptly opened her eyes, her gaze reflecting a mix of resentment and animosity. She had initially intended to minimize her interactions with others after marrying into the prince's mansion and to lead a tranquil life. However, someone persistently incited her. Evelyn Carter clenched her fists, blue veins emerging on the backs of her pale hands. Losing control, she struck the water forcefully, producing a resounding boom. Before she could regain her composure, Lily Hart's anxious voice resonated from outside the door. "Excuse me, what occurred?" Evelyn Carter then recognized that her emotions were overwhelming. She exhaled softly, her expression swiftly reverting to tranquility. Turning her gaze toward the door, she assured that it was acceptable before closing her eyes. She needed to contemplate her approach to Alexander Blake. This territory belonged to him, yet she was not the type to allow others to intimidate her. In her life's lexicon, the phrase, "endure patiently," has never been present. The corner of Evelyn Carter's mouth subtly curved into a faint, expressionless smile before she gradually submerged her head beneath the water, causing the surface to ripple with small bubbles. "Oh, big sister is just now having her meal." Could it be that the chef in the kitchen was inattentive to the princess and is only now delivering the food? Evelyn Carter completed her bath and took a moment to rest before requesting that Lily Hart bring up lunch. As it was already past noon and she had not yet eaten, it was only natural for her to feel hungry. Upon hearing Charlotte Moore's voice, she merely raised her eyebrows and regarded her in silence. Charlotte Moore was also flattered by the mansion's servants, but when had she ever been treated in such a manner? This only heightened her discomfort. While her expression remained unchanged, her eyes grew darker. Rose Hart issued directives: all kitchen staff will face a month's salary deduction and receive 10 strokes each. Let them remember, is the princess someone they can disregard? Charlotte Moore addressed the maid beside her, yet her gaze remained fixed on Evelyn Carter, who had remained silent throughout, with an intimidating expression. "Sister, what is your opinion?" Evelyn Carter did not respond hastily, she chewed her food slowly, swallowing before she spoke. "I do not see the ladle in your hand. What brings you here to interfere in my affairs?" Charlotte Moore's thoughts were inherently understood. Despite being the royal consort and having been married into the prince's mansion for over a month, her lack of favor rendered her largely overlooked by the household staff, resulting in a naturally strained relationship. Should Charlotte Moore attempt to use this as justification to discipline the servants, it is likely that the entire mansion would harbor resentment towards her, ultimately alienating her from the hearts of the people. Consequently, she would find no respite during her time in the prince's mansion. "Why would you assert that, sister?" Charlotte Moore was merely defending sister. "I heard that the prince stayed at Azure Cloud Pavilion last night, so he must have taken notice of sister. If he were aware that sister was being treated unjustly, he would undoubtedly feel a sense of heartache." Only now did Evelyn Carter understand the reason for Charlotte Moore's visit. A look of disdain crossed her face. Did she believe she could vie for her favor? How tedious. Reflecting on this, it appears that these women often have little to occupy their time, free from concerns about sustenance and attire. Their primary anxiety revolves around the potential loss of the prince's favor, which seems no more advantageous than life in the Forbidden City. Evelyn Carter chuckled icily, set aside her chopsticks, and gradually parted her lips. "If you have come here today solely for this matter, then there is no need for concern. I, Evelyn Carter, will not compete with you for favor. Proceed as you wish. Alexander Blake holds no interest for me." Charlotte Moore did not anticipate that she would have the audacity to address the prince by his name directly, however, she did not dwell on it, merely sensing that her words lacked credibility. Sister is truly jesting, did she not overlook the lives of others merely to enter the prince's mansion? Now that she has fulfilled her desire and ascended to the status of princess, what purpose does it serve to feign magnanimity and nobility? To be frank, I, Charlotte Moore, am not as virtuous as sister, I do not have the audacity to take a life so casually. Evelyn Carter's eyelids fluttered. While she had taken many lives in her past existence, her time in this life had been brief, and she had not caused harm to anyone. Suddenly recalling the words of Alexander Blake, Evelyn Carter's expression hardened. "Whom do you claim I have harmed?" "Sister, do not feign ignorance. I will not disclose who was unfortunate enough to be injured, but one thing is certain, the prince will not allow you to escape unscathed." Evelyn Carter was taken aback, she reflected on the situation, uncertain of what had transpired, yet determined to uncover the underlying cause. For several consecutive days, Alexander Blake resided at Azure Cloud Pavilion each night, inciting anger among the other concubines in the palace. They felt powerless but had no alternative. Their only hope was that the prince would soon develop a disdain for Evelyn Carter, allowing them the opportunity to elevate their status. Evelyn Carter experienced profound frustration, her body was too frail. Each time she attempted to resist, she found herself unable to match his strength, lying beneath him as he exerted his will, yearning for the opportunity to eliminate him immediately. Today, shortly after dinner, Evelyn Carter returned to her room early to prepare for bed. Over the past few days, she had allowed that beast, Alexander Blake, to have his way, she could no longer tolerate it. She despised her own inadequacies, lamenting her lack of strength to eliminate him. After instructing Lily Hart to secure the door, she felt sufficiently safe to recline on the bed, however, shortly thereafter, she heard Alexander Blake knocking from the outside. "What does your highness imply?" "Since ancient times, no wife has ever barred her husband from entry. By doing so, are you not inviting the world to mock me? Is Alexander Blake's discipline not stringent?" Alexander Blake's eyes narrowed ominously. "Are you afraid now? You desired to marry here with all your heart, now, I will ensure you pay for everything you have done." Evelyn Carter shut her eyes and drifted into slumber, disregarding him and remaining impervious to his words. "Humph, you believe you can thwart me in such a manner? How naive." Alexander Blake laughed derisively, extended his hand to push the door open, and with merely a fraction of his internal strength, the door swung open effortlessly. He strode in confidently, observed Evelyn Carter reclining on the bed, and spoke with deliberate intent. "So the princess has already fallen asleep. Just in time. Today was quite busy, and I am also fatigued." Before he could complete his statement, he began to remove his clothing and prepare for bed. Evelyn Carter realized she could no longer maintain the facade and was consumed by anger. She opened her clear eyes and gazed at Alexander Blake. "Your Highness harbors a dislike for me, and while I have no words to express this, I must ask why your Highness consistently seeks to trouble me. Does he truly believe I am a soft persimmon, easily manipulated by others?" She articulated this through clenched teeth, effectively conveying the resentment and indignation within her heart. "Princess is jesting, we are husband and wife. It is your obligation to serve me. Why did you compel me to create trouble? Does the princess not wish to serve this prince?" A subtle smile graced his lips, yet it never illuminated his eyes. "Yes, I have no desire to maintain any relationship with the royal family." Evelyn Carter recognized that the conversation had reached this juncture, so she stated it plainly. Alexander Blake appeared to have heard the finest joke imaginable, the corners of his eyes crinkled with amusement, yet what emerged was derision. "I never anticipated that the eldest daughter of the Prime Minister would employ subtle tactics to ensnare me. Initially, I graciously allowed her to indulge me and serve my needs, yet she declined my offer." Evelyn Carter felt profoundly fatigued, and the expression on her face had significantly diminished. "Do not compel me." Alexander Blake regarded her with a perplexed expression and remarked, "Evelyn Carter, you are compelling me, otherwise, we would not have arrived at this point." After speaking, he approached the bed. His coat had already been removed. However, as soon as his hand brushed against the edge of the bed, he experienced a sharp pain. In disbelief, he widened his eyes to examine the bleeding wound on his arm, then glanced at the scissors in her hand, his anger intensifying. "Evelyn Carter, you have the audacity to attempt my assassination." Chapter 12, Injuries. The scissors in Evelyn Carter's hand were smeared with blood, leaving vivid red circles on the pristine white blanket. She appeared composed, devoid of any hint of panic in her eyes. "I have warned you not to compel me. If your Highness continues to exert this pressure, I cannot guarantee what unpredictable action I may take." Alexander Blake, originally a martial artist, regarded the minor wound as inconsequential. He did not even glance at the injury on his hand as he approached Evelyn Carter. "Is that so? I did not anticipate my princess possessing the ability to intimidate others. I am eager to witness the extraordinary actions she will undertake." Before he completed his statement, he extended his uninjured hand and touched Evelyn Carter's face. His intention was merely to intimidate her slightly, ensuring she would not display such arrogance in his presence again. To his astonishment, Evelyn Carter seized the scissors and plunged them directly into his chest. Alexander Blake was alarmed, his toes slightly pointed, his body swiftly recoiling a few meters. His eyes regarded Evelyn Carter with astonishment, as though he were gazing at a deranged woman. "You are insane. You have the audacity to desire my life. Do you not realize that if I perish, you will be unable to live peacefully in this world?" He believed she was merely being audacious, yet to his surprise, she struck directly at the vulnerable point without any hesitation. "If I lose my sanity, it is due to your coercion." Evelyn Carter collapsed in despair and cried out. She recalled the days when Alexander Blake held her down without mercy. Her heart ached. Despite her physical weakness, she refused to permit herself to be humiliated by others. "In the end, we shall perish alongside the prince. Nevertheless, at this moment, I am enduring a life more unbearable than death within the prince's mansion. To have the prince as a companion is indeed an honor. Having expressed that, he appeared to desire getting out of bed. Alexander Blake believed she wished to persist. His heart was taken aback, and his eyes grew somber. Evelyn Carter, do not assume I lack the courage to end your life. Although her father serves as the current Prime Minister, if she persists in overstepping boundaries, he will not be overly accommodating. I am aware that you are bold. Evelyn Carter appeared poised to speak, but a voice from the north gate interjected. Your Highness, are you well? It became apparent that the page boy adjacent to Alexander Blake heard the commotion in the room and deduced what had transpired. Alexander Blake disregarded him, his gaze remaining steadfast on Evelyn Carter, the expression in his eyes shifting erratically. Evelyn Carter, your capacity to harm Sophia does not imply that you can also take my life, we shall simply have to wait and see. After stating that, he readied himself to leave. Upon reaching the door, he appeared to recall something and turned back to her. Evelyn Carter was uncertain about his intentions and regarded him with a cautious demeanor. Alexander Blake observed her taut expression and offered a cold smile, gradually extracting the scissors she clutched tightly in her hand. Please take care not to injure yourself, this king would be devastated. His eyes were devoid of warmth and cold. Evelyn Carter gazed into his eyes and suddenly felt as though she were on the verge of being encased in a block of ice by his stare. Furthermore, Sophia remains without updates, you must exercise due diligence. As soon as his voice faded, Alexander Blake vanished from the room, leaving behind only a subtle fragrance on his person. Evelyn Carter gazed at the blood inadvertently smeared on her hand, her expression resolute. Alexander Blake, feel free to act as you wish. Your Highness, is your hand all right? The page trailed Alexander Blake, who was stationed at the door. He detected some sounds emanating from within the room. Despite his concern, he refrained from entering hastily. Not an issue. Alexander Blake preferred to avoid drawing attention to the situation. Should the Emperor or the Queen Mother become aware, this issue would undoubtedly be subjected to a comprehensive investigation. At this moment, nothing can befall Evelyn Carter, he is determined to repay, many times over, the suffering that Sophia has had to endure. Upon returning to his room, he instructed the servant to close the door and readied himself to tend to his wound independently. That year, when he commanded his troops in battle, he sustained numerous significant and minor injuries, the majority of which he tended to himself. How could this minor wound possibly evade his attention? Gritting his teeth, he ripped the tattered cloth from the wound, which was already saturated with blood and flesh. Alexander Blake couldn't suppress a low curse. It appeared that this woman was indeed quite ruthless. Your Highness, I prepared a bowl of lotus seed soup for you, reflecting on your recent well-being. Isabella Moore grasped a tray in her hand. Noticing that the door was ajar, she pushed it open and stepped inside. Alexander Blake had no opportunity to evade her gaze and was clearly visible to her. Your Highness, what has transpired with your hand? Isabella Moore gasped in terror. As a woman, witnessing the bloodstains on Alexander Blake's hands, she was understandably frightened. Promptly summon the imperial physician, the prince has sustained an injury. Immediately turning around and shouting towards the door, Alexander Blake urgently halted her, his anger intensifying. Who permitted you to enter? Leave immediately. Still shouting like that, if you don't inform everyone, will you not be satisfied? Your Highness, you are injured and must summon the imperial physician. Isabella Moore observed Alexander Blake's hands stained with blood and instinctively declined to depart. She set down the tray and hurried to his side, anxiously scrutinizing him from head to toe. I instructed you to leave this place. Alexander Blake's anger intensified, he used his uninjured hand to push her away, leaving Isabella Moore with no choice but to depart. Finally, his ears cleared. Alexander Blake could not suppress a sigh of relief. His gaze fell upon the lotus seed soup on the table. With a flick of his hand, the exquisite white porcelain bowl was sent crashing to the ground, shattering into fragments. Isabella Moore was seething with anger, convinced that the royal family's treatment of her was somehow linked to Evelyn Carter. Hearing Charlotte Moore mention that he has been residing at Azure Cloud Pavilion recently suggests that this princess is rather cunning. Recalling the recent scene, she felt a genuine fear and approached the servant to inquire. "From where has your highness just returned? What accounts for the excessive bleeding without an apparent cause?" "The prince recently visited the princess consort's residence and has just returned." The servant was uncertain about the reason for her inquiry but nonetheless responded with respect. "What transpired?" Isabella Moore inquired, suspecting that this could indeed be the work of Evelyn Carter. This servant stood at the door, unaware of the events unfolding within the room, yet faintly perceived sounds resembling a struggle. The servant regarded Isabella Moore with suspicion and candidly recounted the events. Typically, Mrs. Isabella Moore would not engage in conversation with servants of their standing. What had transpired today that she was conversing with him for such an extended period? After hearing this, Isabella Moore wore an enigmatic smile. She surveyed the room before turning and heading back to her own space. This time, Evelyn Carter would find it difficult to evade capture. Early the following morning, a visitor arrived at the palace. It was eunuch Henry Clark, who served the emperor. He had a penchant for whispering in the emperor's ear. Fortunately, he was not a significant villain. Others merely chose to overlook his actions. "Your Highness, eunuch Henry Clark has arrived," stating that the emperor has summoned him. The servant outside the door knocked gently. The emperor must have a significant matter to address, otherwise, he would not have dispatched eunuch Henry Clark to convey the message so early in the morning. Alexander Blake had practiced martial arts for many years and possessed a heightened sensitivity compared to the average individual. Upon hearing the servant's knock at the door, he swiftly opened his eyes. Did Mr. Henry Clark specify the subject matter? In recent years, the nation has experienced tranquility and prosperity, with minimal significant events warranting discussion. Do not possess. Then let him wait. Alexander Blake was indifferent. He believed his royal brother was simply bored in the palace and desired his presence for companionship. The wound on his hand had been dressed, yet it continued to throb. He furrowed his brow and examined it before lying down once more, though he had no desire to return to slumber. Sophia has been missing for several days. We cannot persist in this manner, as I fear that inaction will lead to dire consequences. Contemplating this, Evelyn Carter's resolute visage surfaced in his thoughts, leaving him momentarily taken aback. What prompted this unexpected recollection of her? Perhaps it is due to my intense dislike for her. Alexander Blake let out a derisive snort, as though responding to his own thoughts. By the time Alexander Blake completed his preparations, half an hour had already elapsed. Upon entering the main hall, he observed eunuch Henry Clark awaiting him in his official uniform. On the finely crafted wooden tea table, a cup of tea had long since cooled. Why did you not wait for me, eunuch Henry Clark? I was quite fatigued yesterday, which caused me to awaken late today. I trust the eunuch will not hold it against me. Despite his words, there was not a trace of guilt on his face. He stood in the lobby with his hands clasped behind his back, his demeanor even more striking. Your Highness is exceedingly gracious, it is this servant who has caused you disturbance. Eunuch Henry Clark's demeanor was unfavorable, yet it was not appropriate to voice his concerns. The two exchanged soft sighs for a moment. Alexander Blake, having entirely lost his patience, proceeded directly to the crux of the matter. I am curious as to why His Majesty has summoned me to the palace at such an early hour. Eunuch Henry Clark served as the Emperor's personal attendant, which afforded him insight into numerous matters. Your Highness, last night the Queen Mother received news from an unknown source regarding your Highness's injury and is now quite concerned. Consequently, the Emperor has dispatched this servant to summon your Highness to the palace to ascertain your well-being. Alexander Blake was taken aback. Few individuals were aware of his injury. How did the Queen Mother come to know of it? Your Highness, if you are prepared, let us proceed. The Queen Mother has likely been waiting for an extended period and must be quite concerned at this moment. Alexander Blake's eyes gleamed as he nodded and followed Eunuch Henry Clark, contemplating a countermeasure in his mind. What you dread will manifest. He believed he concealed it effectively, yet ultimately, the Queen Mother discovered the truth. Isabella Moore and Charlotte Moore stood in the hallway, observing the backs of Eunuch Henry Clark and Alexander Blake as they departed. They exchanged satisfied smiles. Assassinating a royal relative is a grave matter. Despite her status as the Prime Minister's daughter, she must face consequences. It would be prudent for the prince to seek a divorce. Only then will the four sisters have an opportunity to rise, otherwise, I fear they will remain perpetually oppressed by her. Little sister Isabella Moore, will this ruse succeed? If it does, then all is well. If it fails, then our efforts will have been in vain. If the king discovers that we are, then it will be the end. Charlotte Moore gazed apprehensively at the vacant doorway, her brow furrowed. Chapter 13, entering the palace. Isabella Moore felt a twinge of concern, yet there was no opportunity to contemplate anything else at that moment. Once she proceeded, there would be no turning back. Charlotte Moore appeared apprehensive. The previous night, Isabella Moore approached her, claiming to have a strategy for confronting Evelyn Carter. Having just endured humiliation at the hands of Evelyn Carter, Charlotte's interest was piqued, and she promptly inquired about the method to address the situation with Evelyn Carter. Evelyn Carter, whom the prince favors, exhibits arrogance and has caused him distress. If we disseminate this information, consider the Queen Mother's potential reaction upon discovering it. Her concern will be significant, and her disdain for Evelyn Carter will be profound. At the very least, Evelyn will face reprimand and caution, at worst. The implications were clear without needing to articulate them, compelling her to assist Isabella Moore in spreading the news. At that moment, Evelyn Carter incited her to the brink of anger, and she did not give it much thought. Upon reflection, however, it appeared that something was amiss. If the prince were to discover this, her outcome would likely be unfavorable. Sister, why do you ponder so deeply? Evelyn Carter is merely a disfavored princess within the palace now. Given that sister has been by the prince's side for such an extended period, does sister still believe she is inferior to a disfavored princess? Despite her concerns, Isabella Moore endeavored to maintain a facade of strength as she gazed up at the sky. It is getting late, let us proceed to Azure Cloud Pavilion to pay our respects to the princess. Evelyn Carter observed the two individuals approaching from a distance, and a sense of revulsion welled up within her. Are these two women truly so liberated that they spend their days merely socializing with men, perpetually complicating matters for her? Is it not due to Alexander Blake? Thinking of Alexander Blake, a surge of animosity welled up within him. The previous night, he ought not to have hesitated, he should have wielded his sword with force and plunged it into his chest. Princess, you have been sleeping exceptionally well lately, resting until noon each day. However, as the mistress of the prince's mansion, is it appropriate to continue in this manner? Isabella Moore cast a sidelong glance at Evelyn Carter, who was completing her facial cleansing, her tone laced with sarcasm. Isabella Moore, the younger sister, is merely a concubine of the prince. When did she acquire the authority to criticize me? Evelyn Carter felt neither anger nor distress. She patiently awaited Lily Hart's completion of her hair combing before casting a composed glance in her direction. Charlotte Moore stood silently to the side. Yesterday, she had experienced a loss in this very place. Reflecting on it now, she still felt a twinge of fear. Isabella Moore felt a deep sense of anger, as she believed her status was being wielded to subjugate her. Had her father not been a prime minister, it is unlikely she would have attained the title of princess. Little sister visited today to inquire about something. Yesterday, the prince returned from Azure Cloud Pavilion with injuries. Does older sister know the cause of this? She shifted the topic, exuding confidence. Lily Hart was in the process of packing when she heard Isabella Moore's words. Her hand, which had been tidying the decorations, dropped onto the coffee table with a thud. Concern was evident on her face. Last night, upon entering the room and observing the young lady's hands stained with blood, she was overwhelmed with fear, believing the young lady had sustained an injury. She promptly examined the young lady, only to discover that the blood did not belong to her. That is the situation. Sister exhibits such tranquility. Isabella Moore directed her gaze toward Lily Hart, who approached her gradually. Lily Hart, please tell me, do you possess any information? Lily Hart's demeanor shifted, she averted her gaze from Isabella Moore and knelt on the ground. Madam Isabella Moore, Lily Hart is unaware of anything, and my young lady would never act to harm the prince. Madam Isabella Moore, please do not misconstrue. Isabella Moore scoffed disdainfully, lightly tossing her hair and glancing at the nape of her neck. I merely stopped by to inquire, but I did not assert that it was your young lady who was responsible. Why do you appear so anxious? Is it due to a guilty conscience? Isabella Moore already wore a displeased expression, and with the addition of those words, Lily Hart found herself even more unable to respond. She could only kneel on the ground and shake her head repeatedly. Evelyn Carter observed the scene, her previously composed expression immediately revealing a trace of anger. She let out a cold laugh and approached Lily Hart's side. She crouched down and softly assisted Lily Hart to her feet, patting her hand to convey reassurance. Lily Hart, please proceed to the kitchen and check for any appealing items. Lily Hart was aware that Evelyn Carter sought to drive her away. However, she was concerned that Mrs. Isabella Moore and Mrs. Charlotte Moore might pose a threat to her, which caused her to hesitate. Evelyn Carter instinctively understood her thoughts, silently nodding in acknowledgement, his gaze sharpening as well. Lily Hart was concerned that her presence here would only impede her progress, leaving her with no option but to depart. Charlotte Moore observed everything and scoffed with cold disdain. The master-servant dynamic was indeed profound. Contemplating this, he turned his gaze toward Lily Hart's retreating silhouette, his somber eyes revealing nothing of his intentions. Is it possible that the two ladies visited me today solely regarding this matter? Evelyn Carter fixed her gaze on Charlotte Moore as she approached, the smile on her face failing to illuminate her eyes. Little sister Charlotte Moore has been quite idle lately, frequently visiting the Azure Cloud Pavilion. Is it that she harbors special feelings for this place, or does she aspire to usurp my position and reside here? Your Highness, there seems to be a misunderstanding, that was not my intention. Charlotte Moore's demeanor shifted abruptly. Evelyn Carter's accusation was exceedingly astute. If it were to reach the Emperor's ears, her life could be in jeopardy. Humph, Charlotte Moore's sister can be regarded as someone who understands herself. Evelyn Carter observed Lily Hart standing outside the door, holding a light meal in her hands. She must have been concerned that Evelyn would be hungry, prompting her to bring it over without hesitation. Noticing that the two women had not yet departed, she refrained from interrupting them. She sighed softly, in this prince's mansion, being overly cautious can lead to one's own downfall. To ensure self-preservation, the only solution is to cultivate one's strength. You two ladies should return home. I, the princess, have limited time to converse with you. After making that statement, he turned and entered the inner room, evidently intending to dismiss the guest. Isabella Moore and Charlotte Moore were taken aback by the absence of any benefits. Although they were reluctant, they ultimately departed out of respect for her status. Let us observe how long she can maintain her happiness. Lily Hart, please enter. Excuse me, are you all right? Lily Hart set down the tray, apprehensive that they might launch an attack. The young woman's body had been frail since childhood. If she were to retaliate, she feared she would not be able to contend with the two of them. What might occur to me, foolish girl? Evelyn Carter gazed at Lily Hart's youthful visage, her heart still heavy with sorrow. Lily appeared no older than 14 or 15, in Evelyn's time, individuals at such a tender age were cherished treasures in the care of their parents, shielded from the harsh realities of survival in this incomprehensible world. Lily Hart, should you face any danger in the future, prioritize your own safety, do not concern yourself with me, understood? Her expression was grave, entirely devoid of humor, and Lily Hart abruptly experienced a sense of unease. Excuse me, what are you suddenly implying? Has something occurred? She arrived at the Prime Minister's residence at the tender age of 8, and 6 years have since elapsed. While the young lady has not always treated her kindly, she has never subjected her to unwarranted bullying. This offers her a measure of solace as she observes other maids enduring mistreatment from their masters. Foolish girl, trouble is unavoidable. Evelyn Carter gently patted her hand, averting her gaze as though she were evading something. She understood that achieving a peaceful existence in this environment was far from simple. She questioned her ability to safeguard her. After all, she felt like mud traversing a river at that moment, difficult to defend. She could only hope to protect herself adequately and thrive. She is quite young, nonetheless. Evelyn Carter cast her gaze downward and smiled at her reflection. When had she become so sentimental? Your Majesty, you summoned me here today. Is there something you wish to convey? Alexander Blake feigned ignorance and respectfully saluted the Queen Mother. Alexander, I heard that you were stabbed and injured. Is this true or false? Please do not conceal it from your mother. The Queen Mother, though advanced in age, was well preserved and in high spirits. She sat regally on the bed, attended by 2 devoted palace maids. Alexander Blake had learned of this from eunuch Henry Clark prior to departing from the prince's mansion, so he was not taken aback at this moment. He was merely intrigued by the identity of the individual who had disseminated this information, which had even reached the Queen Mother and the Emperor. Where did Mother learn the story about being stabbed and injured? The truth is, I was merely practicing swordsmanship and accidentally sustained an injury. I never anticipated that people would circulate the rumor that I had been stabbed. Alexander Blake was reluctant to involve Evelyn Carter in this situation. He intended to impart a significant lesson and make her existence exceedingly difficult. Alexander Blake remains an enigma, the future is uncertain. The anguish he inflicts upon Evelyn Carter will, in time, be gradually exacted from him, or perhaps even more severely. The Queen Mother evidently harbored doubts. She turned to the palace maid beside her and inquired, is what Alexander stated accurate? Mother, why would I mislead you regarding such a trivial issue? Alexander Blake was aware that the Queen Mother had made such a request, thus, he nearly accepted it as truth and exhaled a sigh of relief. Upon reflection, it is logical. The Queen Mother nodded in approval and initiated a conversation with him about inconsequential topics. Alexander, have you grown accustomed to Evelyn residing in the palace? She has been frail since her youth. It is essential that you remain attentive to her needs. Do not focus solely on court matters and overlook her. The Queen Mother was undoubtedly aware of Sophia Quinn's existence, however, at this moment, Evelyn Carter held the title of his princess consort. Regardless of his feelings for another woman, he could not allow his newlywed wife to endure any injustice. After all, she was the daughter of the Prime Minister. Mother is correct, I will remember that. Alexander Blake wished for the Queen Mother to cease her discourse, so he interjected, inquiring, why is your royal brother absent? That individual briefly conversed with Mother, then claimed he had pressing matters to attend to and departed. Let it go, disregard him. The responsibilities of being an emperor are demanding. Mother is elderly and cannot manage so much. Alexander Blake resided beyond the palace grounds and seldom encountered the Queen Mother. After conversing with her for a time, he returned to the prince's mansion. As I traveled, I continued to ponder who had leaked the information when I suddenly recalled Isabella Moore, who had unexpectedly appeared in my room the previous night. Pursed lips, could it be her? Chapter 14, Deception. Alexander, what prompted the emperor to summon you to the palace? Daniel Reed placed the book in his hand on the low table. Recently, he had been preoccupied with locating Sophia Quinn. Numerous aspects of the mansion had been overlooked and poorly maintained. It appeared that he would soon find himself busy once more. Nothing. I am merely concerned about my injury. Alexander Blake appeared reluctant to speak, approached the low table, and took a seat. He raised his hand and wearily rubbed his eyes, conveying a desire for silence. Are you injured? Daniel Reed's eyebrows knitted together upon hearing Alexander Blake's voice. He approached him, taking several steps, and scrutinized him from head to toe. Why are you in pain? We met yesterday, were you not still in good health? Speaking of this, Alexander Blake's weary visage betrayed a malevolent glimmer, his gaze drifted toward the window, his entire demeanor emanating a chilling aura. Last night, Evelyn Carter attacked me with scissors. This malevolent individual not only jeopardized Sophia's well-being but also sought to inflict harm upon me. I intend to demonstrate to her just how formidable I am. I was taken aback to discover that, despite being the young lady of the Grand Chancellor's residence, her methods are remarkably ruthless. Daniel Reed was taken aback. He first scrutinized his complexion, which appeared slightly pale and somewhat fatigued. It seemed the situation was not overly serious, which brought him a sense of relief. Alexander, the details of Sophia's case remain ambiguous. Please refrain from drawing conclusions until we have thoroughly investigated the matter. It is not too late to ensure a fair assessment. Alexander Blake regarded Daniel Reed with discontent. How concerned he was for Sophia, did he not realize? Furthermore, all the evidence indicated Evelyn Carter, and he had even assisted her in speaking. Sophia possesses a gentle and courteous temperament. Each time she smiles, the corners of her mouth curve upward slightly, showcasing her small white teeth. She embodies a vibrant woman untouched by the world's harshness, effortlessly evoking feelings of infatuation and nostalgia in those around her. Daniel, when will you assist Evelyn Carter in speaking again? Her health is already deteriorating. Now that she is married into the prince's mansion, she is behaving recklessly due to her status as a princess. I am curious to see how long she can maintain her complacency. Now he granted her wings, allowing her to soar freely, and waited for her to ascend high before forcefully bringing her crashing down to the ground. Brother, do not allow anger to cloud your judgment, I am merely engaging in a reasoned debate. Daniel Reed felt somewhat helpless. This senior brother was typically aloof and had minimal interaction with others. He seldom encountered a woman he admired, which made his affection for her all the more profound.